In 2012, Telltale's The Walking Dead was released, and it was a more pivotal game than most people realise. Not only was it the first huge commercial success for Telltale, it also introduced millions back into the adventure game genre, a genre that had lain dormant since its height in the 90s. That is not to say that there weren't other brilliant games, perhaps even better games, but none were taken to quite like the first season of Telltale's most successful series. It was the beginning of a short stint in the sun before Telltale crashed and burnt. This raises some obvious questions. Was it just the right time and place for The Walking Dead? How much of this rise and fall was down to The Walking Dead? And ultimately, is The Walking Dead a good game? Well, let's find out. Before we explore the game itself for the answers, it's probably best to look at the context surrounding its release, as this would have shaped opinion at the time. This will include looking at the popularity of the graphic novel series, the TV show, and a short history of Telltale games to this point. The idea of The Walking Dead came from Robert Kirkman enlisting his childhood friend Tony Moore. The two were aspiring and semi-successful comic book artists. The inspiration for The Walking Dead is quite obvious to those who love zombies. Romero's Night of the Living Dead series are the main inspiration, but there are other obvious inspirations such as Zombie 2. Kirkman even referenced horror games, most notably Resident Evil. I'm a bad gamer, I'm just not very good at it, and I don't have the time to commit to getting better. I own all the current systems and I have a few games for each. I have Dead Rising but haven't played it yet. Resident Evil 4 was fun, but I can't get past the town where that guy carries a chainsaw. I played the first Resident Evil almost completely through and it's great, nice and creepy. I'd have to say that Resident Evil is the best zombie game, just because I've played it the most, but my video game experience is sadly limited. There's a new game coming out called Left 4 Dead that looks groundbreaking in terms of zombie games. I'll be checking that out for sure. When the pair pitched the idea of a zombie comic series to Image Comics, their idea was of a zombie movie that never ends, and even suggested that it be set in the Living Dead universe, as this is in the public domain. In stepped Jim Valentino, who had a huge creative influence on the series. He suggested that they create their own universe so that Kirkman could own the property outright. Image Comics was founded by Valentino and others on the basis that creators should own their own work, and obviously kept true to this belief in this case. The headline of The Walking Dead is that it was a big hit, going on to win a bucket load of awards after its first issue in 2003. The success of this venture is hard to measure, and I'm no comic book aficionado, though I have read them all. But to me, what makes the comic so compelling, especially in the early issues, is that there's a focus on the humans and not on the zombies. The zombies are the intense pressure and chaos in the world, but we are watching how people that we get intimately familiar with struggle with the new reality of life. To most people, this seems quite similar to Romero and other zombie work, and in fairness, I think there's been a trend since The Walking Dead towards this fashion, but its predecessors tended to use zombies in a wholly different way. Romero described the difference between the two. The Walking Dead is just a soap opera with a zombie occasionally. I always used a zombie as a character for satire or a political criticism, and I find that missing in what's happening now. While that's certainly interesting as a concept, and it might make for a good film or even limited series, a zombie world that never ends doesn't tend to fare as well in terms of mass appeal if you don't care about the people within that world. With this strength and impressive sales numbers, it was no surprise that it was picked up for TV. By 2010, Frank Darabont had been a fan of zombies and by extension The Walking Dead for years. While this may be the case for a lot of people, Darabont also happened to be a 3-time Oscar-nominated writer for his seminal work adapting Stephen King's novels into film. When the person who wrote the adaptation to The Shawshank Redemption says he wants to adapt your graphic novel into a TV series, you nod and you say yes. However, it took several years for this to get going. This was mainly due to Darabont wanting to fully realise the zombie world and its gore, and many telly networks not willing to take that risk. But not every network was that shy, and AMC gave Darabont all the creative freedom he was after. The Walking Dead had been running monthly as a series for nearly 7 years and had about 70 issues. Charlie Adlard had taken over from Tony Moore quite early, and this had not broken any interest in the blossoming story. Despite all this hardcore interest, few people could have expected the success of the television show that had exploded in popularity. Millions tuned in to watch Andrew Lincoln play the iconic Rick Grimes as he battled his way through zombie hordes. While there was a bit of a hoo-ha behind the scenes of the show that I won't be getting into, the main takeaway was the show was a hit that took the main source material and recreated it in gory detail, exciting fans while still hitting the emotional highs of the graphic novels. People loved the hard-hitting tension of the 2010s television, and AMC had gambled that the only way to turn that tension up was with zombies. While the show was fairly faithful to its source material, especially in the earlier series, there were changes that seemed popular and it had kept fans of the comic series on their toes. Most notably, the inclusion of Daryl, a TV-only character who had become the poster boy for the franchise. Being played by Norman Reedus didn't hurt either. If the TV show had to change it up when they adapted The Walking Dead to screen, the third medium, that of video games, surely would need to do something drastic to stop any accusations of repeated content. Telltale formed in 2004 in response to LucasArts choosing to stop developing adventure games. Genres may just be a freehand to help people understand the vibe of a game, but I think it's worth understanding this vibe. Adventure games as a genre can be described as interactive stories and was well established early with text-based interactive stories that resembled the choose-your-own-adventure books of earlier. As games progressed, adventure games also became heavily entwined with puzzles. Obviously, the narrative element was front and center, but the interactivity often came in the form of puzzles that required exploring the game to work out, often with the use of verbs. LucasArts became a leader in this genre in the late 80s and through into the 90s, and they released a series of hits that fit this brief of charming puzzle adventure, often employing a comedic twist. The Monkey Island series, Grim Fandango, Maniac Mansion are all fondly remembered as greats of the genre, and they're not the only ones. But as of the early 2000s, these sorts of games had fallen out of favour while still attracting a core audience. It didn't attract those gamers that enjoyed the action available on the newly released PlayStation, N64 and Dreamcast, and this was only furthered with their success. It had made financial sense for them to drop the focus on these purely narrative-driven adventure games and focus elsewhere. Evidently, not everyone was happy with this, and this led to a lot of developers leaving LucasArts, and they left to form Telltale. Developers including Kevin Bruner, Dan Connors and Troy Melander formed Telltale with a small goal in mind: to make a new Sam and Max game, a game based on a comic book comedy duo. LucasArts had made their own Sam and Max game in 1993. This was down to the fact that they had their creator Steve Purcell on their staff. With their moderate success in comics and the fact that they were silly, yet it seemed like they would be the perfect fit for LucasArts' own brand of comedic puzzle-solving adventure games. There was a few planned sequels that kept getting cancelled for various reasons, the last of which was cancelled in 2004 with the announcement that they would be pivoting away from the genre. It was primarily those who had been working on this cancelled Sam and Max game that had formed Telltale, and evidently they had unfinished business. They also had faith in a new business direction to self-publish their games episodically through the internet. As they planned to concentrate on narrative-focused games, episodic releases made sense content-wise, but this business model also interested investors that looked to the future of gaming in the increasingly online era. Not only did this lure eyes and wallets towards them for investment, it also meant that early games could be released bit by bit with a quicker return. The new team set out immediately to make a Sam and Max game, but licensing agreements meant that they had to wait a year before they could focus on this installment. But they didn't stay static, and they used this time to develop the Telltale engine. This would be used to make all their games for the foreseeable future, and some. They showed off what they could do with an uncharacteristically non-narrative poker game. The first Telltale game that followed their vision was indeed a Sam and Max game that was released episodically via GameTap. While Series 1 of Sam and Max, later called Sam and Max Save the World, did well and even had 2 sequels, it hadn't blown the world away either. It had, however, got Telltale some momentum going forward and enough financial backing to continue to hone its episodic releases. But it wasn't just financial success. Telltale had made a name now for themselves in their ability to take an established IP and create fun and engaging adventure games for a new era. This was obviously shown in the Sam and Max sequels, Bone, The Great Cow Race, and their spin on my personally beloved Wallace and Gromit. While none of these were showstoppers that turned the gaming industry on its head, they were solid and did a good job of increasing Telltale's burgeoning reputation. A reputation that had grown enough to take on a beloved LucasArts property, Monkey Island. If you consider that LucasArts hadn't transferred the Sam and Max IP, it really does show that Telltale's stock had risen. The change of CEO at LucasArts probably also helped. Tales of Monkey Island could be an episode all of its own, and it had a fairly positive, if it mixed, reception from die-hard fans, but on the whole it was lauded as a brilliant and intelligent return to the world of Guybrush Threepwood, and the sales exceeded expectations. Its episodic nature also been timed greatly with the rise of Steam as an online distributor that ordinary people trusted. Tales of Monkey Island also was the first game to have an ongoing narrative between episodes. A newly released episode could now rely on you playing a previous one to fully comprehend it. From here, Telltale didn't look back. They were entrusted with 2 more IPs, both of which were bigger than ever before. The first Telltale game I ever played was Back to the Future the Game, an interesting story based on the hit 1985 film. Back to the Future as a series hadn't released anything of note since the trilogy had finished in 1990, but you could still call it a household name that most people would have heard of. This was a big deal and it got people excited. I won't go deep into the detail of this this game, but safe to say it was a big success for Telltale that was well regarded. It had a fun story that resonated well in plot and tone alike, and it kept people coming back. Another, even bigger series, literally and metaphorically, released around the same time but didn't have the same critical response. I am talking about Jurassic Park. It was another series that had been a worldwide phenomenon but now lay dormant. I've never played it because it didn't show up on my radar, and despite being a 90s kid, I don't really find dinosaurs that interesting. And I don't think it matters too much for this retrospective, but what I will point out is that reviewers and audiences alike praised the narrative and tone, something that Telltale were clearly becoming specialists in, but found the gameplay bland and uninspiring. Telltale had started to use QuickTime events and chose to focus on these over puzzles, most likely to try and match the pace and drama of the source material. QuickTime events are not seen favourably now, but they were all the rage at the time. So could this just be a case of first-time kinks needing to be ironed out? I can't answer that. As I said, I haven't played it, and I've done enough faffing about, and we should focus on the game proper. So, to sum up all we've learned, Telltale had formed to focus on narrative-driven story games that were seen as experts in crafting compelling stories that matched the tone of IPs they borrowed. They sold their games nearly exclusively in a dynamic episodic format through online portals such as Steam, just as these online sellers were becoming household names. They were lining up for a new game based on the highly popular world of the Walking Dead graphic novels that was known for its dramatic telling of humanity in an apocalyptic crisis. Its popularity had skyrocketed due to the highly rated and highly successful television adaptation that was near its peak in popularity. All in all, the stars seemed to be aligned, but was Telltale's The Walking Dead Season 1 about being in the right place at the right time, or was it as good as sales would suggest? Let's find out.
You get sick and you die and you come back and you kill anything you can find.
You have a boyfriend?
Glenn.
For this retrospective, I'm going to go through the story bit by bit, summarising it and giving an evaluation about what I think the plot is like, because that is the main appeal of this game, its story. So it will spoil it if you haven't played it before and watched this video. You might want to do that, but it's a warning nonetheless. I'll be going through the decisions that you make in more detail later on in the retrospective, as I think going through every single possible world will make it really hard to go through. This game series adapts to the choices you make. The story is tailored by how you play. Sounds appetizing, doesn't it? A series that develops based on your input, that your choices drastically matter. This statement does a lot to wet the whistle of any potential narrative-driven gamer. It aligns your expectations and maybe predisposes you to feel the weight of future decisions. By framing your expectations of this experience, it makes the player want to engage to these choices. I think this alone immerses people. Kind of like when you play the original Resident Evil games and you get that bold warning that this game contains scenes of explicit violence and gore. It already puts you on the back foot, but it's kind of enticing you to experience these scenes, acting like a devil's finger pulling you towards the action rather than warning you against it. I have such a fondness for these messages that I actually squealed a bit when I saw the message in front of me when I opened my copy of Resident Evil 2, the board game. I definitely should cover these games at some point. Anyway, this statement for The Walking Dead is great at establishing the vibe of what the game wants, but this only works if it has the substance to back it up. But as this is where Telltale started using this tagline, I think it's worth giving it the credit it deserves. The game starts in a police car. There are a lot of similarities to Resident Evil 2, isn't there? There are also zombies in it, which is pretty much a theme of both games. To some of you, if you played the game before, the graphics might seem a little bit different, and that is because I'm playing the definitive edition, a collated collection of all the Walking Dead games, as this is the easiest way to play nowadays. And since my Xbox 360 died, it's also the most accessible in terms of price. Fundamentally, nothing is different in definitive edition. It functions the same, the story and how it goes along is no different. This does include some of the more awkward clunkiness that you see. There's only a cleanup of the graphics slightly, and an optional graphic black shader, though I say optional, I didn't realise it was optional until after my first playthrough, so most of the footage in this game will have it on. You can see here the difference between the shader on and off. I also found on Reddit through user KGO312 a few good comparisons between versions, and while it can make a slight change to atmosphere and it gives the game more pop, I'd argue that game is very similar, and this graphical option doesn't fundamentally change the game's tone. Alongside this opening scene, we get some ambience that is composed by Jared Emerson Johnson. His soundtrack favours the listlessness of life and gradual suspense rather than on any catchy musical sting, and this stays with us throughout the series. When the opening cutscene properly begins, we are introduced to two characters, an unnamed cop and the protagonist Lee Everett. Interesting choice to start with your main character being taken to jail.
Well, I reckon you didn't do it then.
We are given an instant chance to reply. This isn't a cutscene, this is the game. Dialogue options are there, but you have a time limit in order to answer in a lot of situations. The whole game feels like one long cutscene, but it's interactive the whole way through. This adds a moment of real world pressure to replicate the situation you're in, and also make you feel more reactive. This does a good job of making you put yourself into the character, as you don't have enough time not to do that. The conversation you go through with the officer is all about how you get to where you are, but we've only just begun, so we have no bloody idea. As we've been told our choices matter, you could be forgiven thinking this might be an elaborate way of choosing a backstory for Lee, but all of the options tend to skirt around the subject, and this is more about listening to the officer. Asking about the officer's background does reveal that he lived close by and used Lee's family's pharmacy. If you're more confrontational, I guess you'd get less of that backstory. There are creeping hints that things are turning for the worse around you, and then it hits you. Lee emerges from the crash injured but alive, but we can't say the same for the policeman. We now get into the non-dialogue gameplay that will be very reminiscent for adventure gamers. You need to look around for clues in order to solve any current problem you are in. Yet, old school puzzles, just less 2D sprites. Looking around, you get little hints to what is interactable and how so. You can look at different things and Lee will tell us what he thinks. Then you'll get other, more contextual options that appear depending on what's going on and what items Lee has to hand. Previously, we could only answer questions, we couldn't move around, but now we have the opportunity to move forward in the scene, and that is not obvious because of the previous information, unless you have the UI not on minimal, in which it tells you you can move. Smashing out of the car, we see the body of the policeman and his shotgun. I don't think this is too meta to go for the gun first. We do know that we're in a game called The Walking Dead. Calling out to the cops is no answer, and if we want to survive, we will need to get these cuffs off and look for help. We better get the keys off of his body. Oops, dropped them by his mouth. Seems I'm not the only one getting meta around here. Predictably, the cop gets up, but he's not alive. He is undead, and he is coming for us. Lee, being injured, falls back, and now we have to slowly edge away and back to the shotgun. Quickly pick it up, look over to the shotgun shell, load the gun, try that again because Lee Everett is a bit cack-handed, and finally shoot the zombie. This is a type of timed event that has you quickly adapting to your situation and quickly solving a puzzle or acting before you die. I wouldn't call it a quick time event, as you do actually use predisposed mechanics. It is just the fact that you are using them in more of a timely manner. Surviving that encounter draws more zombies towards you, and so you run in the direction of an unidentified figure in the background. Lee stumbles again, but escapes to the relative safety of a high fence garden. As Lee, you're now on a non-railed segment. Instead of picking options and actions based on what is happening to you, you can actually look around and investigate the area around at your own pace. Maybe find a few items, and later on you can have longer conversations with others if you choose to do so in this time.
Fill one of those teacups with some bourbon if I could.
Do love that classic adventure game trope happening of a character explaining what they're thinking out loud when you look at anything. It makes Lee Everett more comparable to Guybrush Threepwood than you would expect. It's just that he's at the end of the world instead of Monkey Island. Looking around the house and its garden, you find the place to be in ruins. It has been sacked and looted. Nothing remains except a pool of blood in which Lee engages in his favourite pastime. We can also hear from an answering phone that the family that lived here had gone away to Savannah, leaving their kid with the sitter while the world deteriorated around them. It was unlikely that they were ever reunited. Suddenly a voice comes from a walkie-talkie.
Daddy?
That kid is still here in a treehouse, hiding from the monsters, waiting for her parents to come home. Before we can process this, we get to meet the babysitter. The only problem is she's a zombie. Falling over once again, we nearly turn into lunch before that girl appears and hands us a hammer, saving us. This is Clementine, and we can probably guess that even if her parents are alive, they will likely be unable to get back to her and reunite. Lee does the humane thing, chooses to look after her.
What should we do now?
Clementine asks us what to do now, and we get two choices. While dialogue certainly plays its part in adapting the story, some choices are more significant and more straightforward than others. This is the first option that we get to make any reasonable change. As I said, in this retrospective, I'm first going to go through the game as I played it in this run, exploring the way the story is told and the mechanics we encounter, before going back through these iconic decisions and exploring how much of this game does truly adapt. Getting back to the decision, I choose not to be stuck in this unfamiliar place at night, but use sunlight to get out. Here also my controller imploded, and I don't know why, so I'm using my mouse and keyboard going forward if anyone wonders why that has changed. We don't even leave the garden before we bump into two new people, Sean and Chet, who ask for help moving their van in exchange for a lift for us and Clementine out of there. I choose to tell the truth to these guys that I'm just a stranger, as I can't expect Clem to keep things secret after just meeting her, and if they think I've kidnapped her, that would be trouble. We help move the car in the way, and somehow Lee with a bad leg and Clem, who's only 8, are stronger than Chet, but Hey ho, a few quick moments and we're away. We make it to Sean's family farm and his dad Herschel meets us. This prickly fella is someone fans of the graphic novel and TV show would know, as he becomes part of Rick's groups when they find themselves on this very same farm later on. As this game is based in the graphic novel universe, he appears in the same way he does in them. His character is more confrontational in this issue and to the point than his TV counterpart. He does question us and he seems reluctant to have strangers about the farm, but he still does treat Lee's leg and allow the pair to stay in their barn overnight with another family that is staying there. Oh, it's that barn. If you know, you know. Anyway, safe from the knowledge of what would come of it, we retire to the surprisingly empty barn.
It smells like...
And we refuse to say the place smells like an S word. As I'm a former teacher and I'm refraining from swearing as around little ones, I'm forcing Lee to do that too. We awake to a redneck voice. This is Kenny, father of the family that apparently stayed in the barn with us, though I didn't see any sign of them last night. We get into a civil conversation about his family and I try to select the middle option in dialogue, but sometimes it refuses to change on what you're highlighting via mouse. This is frustrating, but in this case it made little difference, but there are definitely times in the future it makes much more of an impact. Kenny introduces us to his wife Katja and Duck. Katja is a sweet and motherly old veterinarian and Duck is clearly on the spectrum, but for him this allows him to be a bit more naive about the world around him and stay more childlike in the face of this apocalypse. We get an offer from Kenny to get a ride to Macon, the only place that Lee has a reason to head to because that's where he's from. Kenny says he doesn't mind having an extra pair of hands about, but he does need to fix up the car first. This gives us time to look around the farm and help Sean shore up the fence. It's the least we can do after he helped us. In these areas we can explore and talk to people. You tend to get a lot of extra information, decisions and world building in these areas. Of course I can't include it all, but I will say that the writing and voice artistry is fantastic, straight from the off.
We passed so many people that needed help and we just passed people over some, just...
The way that Katja explains her family's horrendous escape to the farm is horrific, from the absence of detail, the hollowness to her voice and the wild stare of the animation. This, accompanied again by that slow ambient background music, makes these human reactions to the world all the more grounded in the eeriness and illusion of safety. Talking to Sean, we get to hear about his dad's wariness of strangers and naivety to the way the world is now. If you've read the books or watched the show, you can say this is true to character, but Sean seems to be on the right check and keeping him honest. After helping out and getting a grilling from Herschel, we are alerted to a scream. Sean and Duck are in trouble as walkers have attacked the fence, grabbing Duck and trapping Sean's leg. We get a split second to choose whether to save Duck or Sean. We get to see the world slow down as we witness carnage before us. Look left, we see Sean struggling to survive. Look right, we see Duck doomed to die. If we let time run out, we are likely to help neither. You have to make a choice. I choose Duck. Sean is bigger and more likely to last long enough for me to come back to him. Sadly, Lee is only able to save Duck, and in his grief, Herschel tells us to kindly move away. Not a good time to argue with him, and so we take Kenny up on his offer to give us a ride. The next scene cuts to the outskirts of Macon. We've run out of fuel and the car has stopped. It's on foot from now on, but this ain't a safe option because Kenny decides to ask zombies for help. Luckily, we're saved by a nearby survivor and ushered into the pharmacy they and their group were holed up in. This group seems to be holding on by a thread. They are imbued in an argument over helping us. As it gets heated, the argument steers over Duck, who was attacked in the skirmish and is covered in blood. Larry, the big old fella, wants him gone. Kenny wants to kick his ass. We can choose to side or stay out of it, but I ain't killing a kid, especially if we don't know if they're bitten or not. I don't want to fight, so I have Lee stand his ground, and Larry's heart gives out before Lee's nerve. Also, Clem gets attacked by a zombie as she needs the loot while this happens, and we save her. His daughter, the slightly less angry Lily, explains the need for medicine from the drug counters, but it's a lot. Throughout, we get hints that Lee knows this place more than most. With the knowledge that his parents owned a pharmacy that we got from the police officer, it's easy to put two and two together, but we wouldn't have done so if we hadn't got that information. Lee is tasked with getting to the medicine while others take watch and whatnot. Carly is the name of the girl who saved us, along with Glenn. Yes, that Glenn. Glenn, who's probably one of the most recognisable characters of The Walking Dead. Turns out he was here before he met Rick in Atlanta. There's also Doug, who's a bit of a nerd and he seems quite friendly enough, if a bit useless at this precise moment. I make sure to talk to everyone, discuss what's going on and explore the area. This starts the first actual environmental puzzle of the game that requires you to look around, talk to people, find a way through. While you can rush the solution, you miss out a lot if you don't communicate with others, and that's kind of the appeal of this game. During this section there are some cute character bits, especially Carly not realising there's no battery in the radio she's been trying to get to work. This doesn't take away all the tension, but instead grounds the character character into something believable. As we step into the back office, Lee looks apprehensive. We still don't know a huge deal about his backstory, and it seems that he and his family hadn't seen each other for a while. Clementine follows us in, and we find a photograph confirming that this was his family's shop. Lee tears out himself from the picture, but Carly confronts him. She recognizes him from following his story on the news. She tells us that we were found guilty of killing a senator who was sleeping with his wife, and that also Lee was a professor, so swings and roundabouts, I guess. It's still left somewhat ambiguous as to whether Lee was actually guilty, but Carly doesn't seem to care. She says that she's judging us as useful and somewhat of a good guy on balance. I find the dialogue options hard to answer with the mystery, as I may behave differently depending on whether or not I truly was guilty. This could be a bit unsettling. Is the mystery of Lee's background worth this awkwardness of not knowing what to say in dialogue? Maybe. It certainly is interesting, I guess, but I'm on the fence as to whether or not it detracts from the early game. Luckily I can stay on the fence and not be bollocked, unlike Lee. The thing that might swing this is actually we're being asked to whether or not we should reveal we were convicted of murder, the truth of whether we committed it or not being redundant. People may react differently if they knew we were heading to prison on the day of the outbreak, whether or not we were guilty or not. I also choose not to say anything in response to Carly. You are told by the game in no uncertain terms that silence is a valid option, but some people won't like it. As someone who suffers with chronic verbal diarrhea, I love playing out the fantasy of keeping my mouth shut, and honestly there are situations where it's better not to respond. I have found that being silent in Telltale games is somewhat lacking in positive outcomes, but playing through The Walking Dead Season 1, that sometimes people gave you more unique dialogue and reactions based on you being silent than I see in future games. As we continue to look around the back room, we get chatting to Clem, getting to know her a bit more and chatting about our past. Considering she was right behind Carly when she called us a murderer, it's a bit odd she didn't just straight away ask about that, but she asks us about family. While you can avoid some topics with people by cleverly manoeuvring around them, Clem is quick and picks up on it.
You didn't answer my question.
As Clem looks up to me, I choose to tell her the truth, and this settles the debate. Lee is a killer. It may not have been totally intentional, but neither was it not his fault. Every scene between these two is sweet. This can mainly be attributed to the way Clementine is written and act. Clem is neither helpless nor unaware of the madness around her, but she is still a kid and has her own moments of naivety, doubt and sadness. Getting her a plaster hit is just what she needs to help her finger and her mind. Yet she isn't crying or making a scene as she knows the danger. As Lee and Clem get closer, the more they tend to get used to each other's habits, and their care for each other is anything but shallow, and this is the first moment properly see a paternal relationship growing. While we've been exploring inside, Glenn has been outside looking for petrol to fill up the cars in order to get everyone out. While he is known for his ability to navigate silently through danger, he has been caught unawares and needs help. Lee and Carly go out to be that help, finding him at a motel at the edge of the city. He is fine but tells us of a girl trapped in one of the rooms, and we implore to help her, to the eye rolls of Carly.
Let's go save Glenn's damsel in distress.
This requires us to silently kill the walkers around the motel one by one. To do so, we need to find a weapon and decide what order to kill them. This section gives us less freedom of movement than the free roaming sections, but we can instead switch between different static safe areas looking around them for items. We find a screwdriver in a car that seems perfect for silent killing, but it's in a locked car. Luckily, we find a pillow. Adventure games have a history of silly and ridiculous solutions to puzzles. Some are purposefully silly, but others are notoriously obscure for seemingly no reason. While this section is not on the level of absolute absurdity, I couldn't help but think there was an easier, more direct solution to what was going on. The solution to this area is to use the pillow on Carly's gun, smothering the sound in order to get past one of the walkers to another car. This in turn gives us up to a plug that then Glenn breaks in order to reveal something within it that can smash a window silently. Why is that more quiet? How does a pillow muffle a gunshot enough so people don't hear? And surely, couldn't we have just muffled the sound of smashing the window and just grabbed the screwdriver? The rest is much more straightforward and requires just a bit of quick reactions in order to kill all the other zombies, and it's not too difficult. When we get to the girl, we find that she's barricaded inside a room, but that she had locked the room herself as she has been bit.
You have a boyfriend?
Glenn?
This line from Glenn always gets me, but it really does feel out of place. There are plenty of comedic moments in this game, but this feels the most distasteful and out of character. Anyway, she wants to use the gun to end her suffering and also make sure that she doesn't turn and hurt anyone. We can choose to grant her wish or leave. Now, I think that killing her humanely is the kindest thing and also stops her from hurting anyone in the future, but it also wasn't lost on me that I just completed a bit of a mangled puzzle in order to silently save her. I think letting her top herself would put us in more danger than less, as as the gunshot would attract all these walkers. There's no dialogue available for this option, and I know there can't be every wild justification in the world tailored for, but considering the steps we just took to be silent, I thought that this was overlooked. The lady tries to grab the gun anyway, and this leads to the floor giving way, and despite no one being badly hurt, she ends up with the gun, and she ends it. You don't need to have played through this section twice to realise that no matter what we chose there, that woman would die. If we'd just given the gun, then she most likely would have killed herself. Does this just mean that we have an illusion of choice in this game? Do our actions actually matter if the same things are going to happen no matter what we pick? Well, I will get to this question much later after the main playthrough, but I do think it's worth keeping this question in your head. Returning to the pharmacy, we find that Lee's brother is outside, trapped as a zombie beneath a fallen telegraph pole. He likely has the keys to the medicine store, but there's a wave of zombies between us. There's another puzzle that requires us to use Doug's technical skills to distract the zombies around our brother. Long drawn out scenes and camera angles are juxtaposed with the sudden and close-up violence, and this reflects the volatility of this world we are in, and actually having to click to attack our brother makes this all the more visceral. We haven't actually gotten to know Lee's brother well, and we aren't emotionally tied to him as a character, but the scene does its best to show the enormity of what this burden is on Lee. I just wish we had more time. We say our goodbyes, grab the keys and get inside. Opening the door to the medical area leads to the alarm going off.
Oh no.
We are in trouble. Kenny goes to get his truck with Lily and Larry, Catcher gets Doug ready, and we man the barricades with Doug and Carly. Clem stays by us trying to help and managing it, grabbing our dad's old cane to slide between the door handles. Here we get more traditional QTEs, as in tap this button, then this one, and then maybe repeatedly tap this. In this game it's hard to think about how to recreate action without some sort of timed event, and The Walking Dead has a lot of them. Despite lots of the game focusing around character and puzzles, the threat of zombies needs to have some immediacy to it when they are close. However, the better action elements in The Walking Dead tend to avoid the more conventional quick tapping QTEs and involve more specific and curated design. These can be more revolved around the puzzle elements, requiring us to use the main mechanics under timed and pressured conditions, such as the shotgun example from earlier, or they can be simpler and require us to select things in the environment, just making sure that we pay attention, most obviously hitting or shooting zombies. While this isn't top-notch gameplay for a purely narrative game, it does make us stay attentive to our environment so we can react whenever we need to. As there's no indication between pure cutscene and action, we have to be on it all the time. These QTEs don't have the same effect and are unchanged between the encounters. If something comes up on screen, I'm tapping Q before I even know why I'm doing so. In this case, it keeps the front doors closed. As we do so, Carly and Doug have gone either side to see off the windows, but both are starting to struggle, and we enter into the same vision as before when Sean and Duck needed our help. Do we save Doug? Or do we? Well, we obviously choose Carly. One of the easiest decisions in the game. She is level-headed, a proven good shot, she has understanding, calm under pressure, she knows more about us than anyone, and yet it doesn't faze her, and while she's not aggressive, she's happy to stand her ground. Doug is, well, Doug. He's kind and smart, a bit panicky, and not great in social situations, fading into a bit of a follower role. I don't know if I'd ever save Doug, and it's not like he's terrible, like he's intelligent, but more in a help you build your PC way rather than help you in a medical emergency way. And he's up against a born survivor who has our back. The only strong reason to save Doug is if you're worried your history will get out, but that's more of a reason to let Carly die than to save Doug. I also would argue that she has a gun, making it more likely that if we helped her first, we could then use that gun to help Doug. But helping Carly only gives her enough time to fight back the zombies and not enough to help Doug. He is unfortunately grabbed and dragged into the alleyway and ritualistically ripped to shreds. Kenny comes back just after the nick time to tell us the car is ready. We fight off a zombie that's got Clem and head to the exit, but after Larry lets Clem pass, he punches us straight in the face, saying we ain't coming with him. Well, what a knobhead. Luckily, Kenny comes back for us and saves our skin. The scene cuts to the motel where that doomed lady was. Our group is there, mostly safe, except Doug, of course. Before we can check in with Clementine, which is my main concern, we speak to Glenn. He's leaving for Atlanta. He's got friends there and he's worried for them. He also needs to be there for law consistency reasons, so we say our farewells and he heads off. We catch up with the rest of the gang, dealing with the fallout of the episode, especially Carly's survivor's guilt. Clementine is happy we saved her again, but she wants to be less afraid, which is heartbreaking, and Larry warns us that he knows our history. While that explains why he punched us earlier, it also explains why we're not necessarily going to go around shouting that this guy literally did just try to kill us, though I still think I would do that in that situation. Lily seems to like us, however, so she must be unaware, and it might be because I gave her food earlier. It's what I did with the girl once, and now I'm married to her. The episode ends with the sound of gunshots in the background and the power power going off at the motel, an ominous sign followed by the jankiest character movements. The first episode has given us a good overview of what to expect from the series, an overwhelming sense of lingering depth that haunts the background, followed by stings of action when it reaches out to take its due. The strength lies in the conversations and atmosphere built by clever writing and a surprisingly grounded world. There are some interesting puzzle elements, both for the better and worse, and the action sequences vary quite drastically in quality. But overall, that connection to Lee and Clementine is the hook that makes this game drag you forward. After the end of each episode is a list of the major decisions in the episode and a percentage of people who pick the same option. Percentages for the episode are so close to 50% across the board, I'm actually surprised, especially for the Carly one, as most people pick Doug. Going into episode 2, we'll see how these decisions impact on the story.
It's not the bite that does it. You come back no matter how you die.
Each episode ends with a television style next time on The Walking Dead. This used to be important for when shows had to retain your attention over weeks before you could binge watch them all on demand. The episodic nature of The Walking Dead and the couple of months between releases meant that they had to do the same. Likewise, the game also starts every episode with
Previously on The Walking Dead.
In order to catch up players with the event so far. This serves three purposes. Firstly, it allows people to be reintroduced with their characters and the plot of the game in a short snippet, and even allows new players to start at a later episode, though doing so is definitely not recommended. The way The Walking Dead frames the previously on section, exactly like the TV programme, shows that its secondary purpose is to align itself with the extremely popular show. If you can invoke images of Andrew Lincoln and Norman Reedus fighting off the undead, then you're starting with an advantage in winning over your audience. Lastly, it reinforces the weight of major decisions you've made in the previous episodes. Highlighting Doug's death makes you dwell once again on that choice that you've made. After that iconic sentence once again appears, episode 2 begins. Lee is out in the woods, and we can see that the graphic black option actually does a good job of aligning the game with the comics, though even without the remastered extras, the game's art design is well tuned to a graphic novel style. I think this helps the mid-budget game get the most out of its fairly modest budget. We expect a bit of graphite roughness, and by leaning into this you get a strong stylistic tone without the expectation of grandeur. This may be why the Jurassic Park game was seen as ugly, but The Walking Dead gets a bit of a pass. Jurassic Park conjures wide panning shots of high fidelity beauty mixed with close-up prosthetic masterpieces. You kind of need a AAA game budget to pull this off. Resembling a graphic novel is so much more a modest aim, yet it's just as aesthetically interesting. It's been 3 months since the last episode, and Lee is out looking for food with a new character Mark. We know a little bit about him, but he seems to be observant of the group dynamics. He's chill when he's hungry, as is Lee. Apparently everyone at the motel is, and hunger seems to be the driving force behind this episode. Apparently this is a hunting trip, but they aren't having much luck, but someone has it worse as them as a scream is heard in the distance. It's not Kenny, as Mark presumes, but a stranger who's caught in a bear trap. 2 teenagers are with him, pleading with Lee to help the man in the bear trap, who is apparently a teacher of theirs. But the bear trap won't open, and it seems to be tampered with. Walkers close in, another time puzzle segment emerges. Firstly, you can try and break this trap, but it isn't any use. But what makes this more memorable is that the fact that you can only know this if you try it. The option to chop off his leg only becomes available if you've tried to cut away the trap first. While this is a small action in the grand scale of things, it shows that the process of thought of the characters, and it informs players that exploring options, even in time sequences, can reveal more solutions, pushing the player to fully investigate all their environments, even under duress. I decide that he still has a chance if we chop off his leg. That's more than most get, so I get to it. We grab the teacher and look to get out of this dangerous clearing, but before we do, one of the boys gets taken by the approaching horde. Well, the apparent approaching horde. Sometimes this game has issues in representing the action and danger properly, and this is a big example of it. Travis, the boy here, has plenty of time and space to easily escape, but just lets himself get eaten. The implication is that he was surrounded and overwhelmed, but this is not what we see. This is not the only time something like this happens, but it's probably the worst offence. You can understand the intention of what the story is trying to represent. The situation is painted as dire by the voice acting, and this kind of does enough to fool you, but the animation just doesn't match up, and so the scene feels rough. Before we see Lee and the gang get back to the motel, we get to see the other survivors coping with the slow monotony of the apocalypse, as food and entertainment are hard to come by. The clock-like bang of a football hitting an oil drum echoes through until it is broken suddenly by the urgency of the returning hunting party. The hectic rush is met by resistance from Lily, who's become a de facto leader of sorts, and is worried about more mouths to feed. Kenny argues against her. Kinda want to side with Kenny, but think that diffusing the situation would be for the better.
It doesn't matter who's in charge. Those people are here now. I guess we just have to decide what happens next.
No, Lee, it does matter.
That pleases nobody. With Katja tending to the injured teacher and the others huffing about, Lily stresses about the difficulty of being the leader, especially when it comes to rationing supplies. And so she tasks us instead with splitting the 4 scraps of food between the remaining 10 people. This is a calm between storms that gives us time to get to know how people are holding up, assessing their need for food and the goings-on between episodes. Before anything, I see if Kat needs help as she's single-handedly fixing a chopped leg. We do the bare minimum and skedaddle. I choose to feed the kids, obviously I'm not a monster. 2 more scraps remain, and as I've given Mark my axe, I think that he might need some food to lift it. I try to give that last ration to Kat, as she is actually the only one doing anything, but she's too busy to accept, and I think maybe Lily would be the best choice. I'm not really sure. Sadly, Kat is unsuccessful with saving the teacher, but before there's time to process this, he reanimates and attacks, leading to struggle against the undead, only just surviving because Carly is the best. Ben, the remaining student, is under fire.
Why didn't you tell us he was bitten? What? He was bitten, and you didn't say a goddamn word.
But he wasn't bitten, I swear!
Well, your not bitten friend here came back to life and tried to kill my wife.
What? Wait, you all don't know?
What the hell are you talking about?
It's not the bite that does it. You come back no matter how you die. If you don't destroy the brain, that's just what happens. It's gonna happen to all of us.
This is one of the most interesting things about The Walking Dead as a world. It explains how the stereotypically trigger-happy world of the USA could be overthrown by zombies. A bite will turn you quickly, but if you die from any other cause, you will still turn. This world will never truly be free from anxiety and danger. Ben also explains the horrific story of how he found this out in a pretty matter-of-fact nature that shows how normalised these horrific experiences have become.
Someone went in the girls' room the next morning and... God.
Back off!
The story is interrupted by 2 southern gentlemen. Apparently they're from a dairy not too far away and wanted some fuel for generators. They're willing to trade for food, something I don't think that we can afford to turn down. We cautiously accept bringing Mark, Ben, Carly and ourselves to make sure everything is tickety-boo. On the journey there, we catch up with Carly, dodge a few prying questions from the brothers, and we see shit go down.
Fuck you!
Apparently, the same bandits that made Ben and his fellow students very unhappy are still about. Luckily, we make it to the dairy in one piece and we see what it has for us in store. The initial trade goes down well and we meet the boys' mother. They offer us around for dinner to cement a good relationship and so we can look for a more beneficial partnership in the future. Carly and Ben leave to deliver the food and invite while Lee and Mark stay to double check the safety of the premises and also to help ingratiate themselves with this new group. From first glances, nothing seems too wrong and I even get round to fixing a swing for the farm. It'll be nice for Clem and Duck to play on and it also helps with the relations. Andy, the older and far less creepy looking brother, asks us to check the perimeter with Mark as the whacked up electric fence that defends this farm often has fried zombies tangled up in it. After a couple of limb removals, we come to a broken post. We jump over to get a better purchase but we meet the bandits via a welcoming crossbow bolt. Mark is hit but not fatally and we both take cover behind a tractor. The bandits only have bows and arrows and if we can get to the gate of the farm, we should be safe, but we need cover to do so. This starts off a one-off set piece that has Lee and Mark follow the tractor they're hiding behind as it rolls them slowly to safety. This section has us using the usual interactive elements that we've played with, but also focuses on our movement as well, as we must make sure to stay behind the rolling barricade. As the tractor comes close to the fence gate, zombie carcasses get in the way, almost comically so after the first. We throw them out of the way and continue our slow march to safety. The last zombie isn't dead, however, and starts to crawl after us, meaning we need to strike a balance of staying in cover but not being too slow that the crawler gets us. This is a great idea, but in practice it doesn't work as well as is imagined. It's hard to truly judge the distance you need to be away from the zombie and how far you can be forward. I managed to get Lee killed here the first time in this run. Sometimes if you do fail to react quickly, Lee will die and you'll get a game over screen. I always prefer when these interactive movie style games just accept you mucking up and punish you in game rather than than make you retry the sequence. When you die in Super Mario, Elden Ring or whatever, you are challenging your skills, so dying and restarting is part of that process. It's the negative reinforcement. But The Walking Dead Season 1 is not challenging your skills. That isn't why you're playing this game. The only reason you may want a game over is to show that you can't just sit through this game. You have to actively engage with it, not just watch it. If you could stumble through every sequence, there'd be no danger in these more vital moments. But dying kind of rubs against the idea that your actions have consequences when you essentially respawn to give it another go. Those actions, bad as they were, now don't matter because you've restarted. I do accept that there does need to be some fear in order to give some anxiety to these areas, but this trade-off is hard to achieve for narrative-driven games. The alternative of having in-game consequences for failing action segments is more compelling, but it's not always an achievable aim. That is unless the consequence is quite trivial, such as having Lee look worse for wear, maybe some extra dialogue or achievements if you do well. These things may keep many of us on our toes and perhaps work better than a respawn, but it won't work for everyone, and it would mean that a player wouldn't actually have to be actively playing to progress the story, something that is quite vital to this game. When we get back to the safety of the farm, Mark goes to get treated by Brenda, and we learn more about these bandits. Well, that worked out well, didn't it? All of this commotion occurs just as the rest of the motel lot, bar Carly and Ben, turn up for a lovely dinner. Again, we are able to explore around and chat with everyone and see where their minds are at. The now usual mudslinging between Lily and Kenny goes on. What is actually quite interesting is that we can push Clem on the swing we repaired. It's nice to have this quite wholesome interaction occur just because we went out of our way to help earlier. We get a very fitting narrative reward for doing that bit extra of looking around and searching that little bit more. This whole time feels quite eerily calm compared to what's just happened. The wrong tone considering the bandits in the woods are a very real threat that's just attacked us. We don't fret for too long over this threat, as Lee heads out with Danny to stake out a bandit camp in order to assess their strength and possibly take the fight to them. The pair find an outcropping quite soon and we get to look through some bits and bobs. Most notably, we can see some clues to what's going on, such as
A video camera.
Let me see that.
all this time, Danny has seemed to be quite shifty, but his explanations make sense on face value at least, and the bandits did attack us. Inside the tent, there seems to be some sentimental items, a photo of a bunny and Clem's hat. How the hell did that get there? Before we get a chance to answer, we are called out.
The hell?
Don't fucking move. Shit!
Put your guns down.
I ain't going back. You tell him Jolene ain't going back.
Hey, we had a deal. No shooting as long as we gave you food. What the fuck happened?
The bandits seem to be the kind of people to shoot first and ask questions later, but this lady seems to like her talking. I choose not to blow her brains out and instead diffuse the situation. I want to find out some more. Jolene, assuming that is her name tag, does seem to be from the Save Lot group, but there seems to be more going on that meets the eye. She's all over the place and not giving some proper answers, even saying that we stole Clem. Before we can get to brass tacks and she can reveal more.
What you got in mind for...
Well, thanks, Danny. That totally doesn't make you look suspicious. With the gunshots still ringing, we hurry back to the farm. Katja is nursing the cow, but Kenny is suspicious of the brothers in the farm. And due to our adventure with Danny, so am I. When Kenny suggests looking around, especially in the back of the barn, I'm all for it. A quick bit of generator sabotage makes the older of the brothers clear off enough to get the door open.
Boy, didn't you hear the bell? Dinner time.
It's a slaughterhouse. As we get caught, Lee gives the most stupid of excuses.
Look, I just came in and found the door open like that.
Probably my idea, brother.
But it works? This is crazy. We know something is up, but we can't voice it. We can only choose to wash our hands and eat dinner. We can use this as an excuse to go investigating more, but don't think we really need to do that. It feels like there should be an option to shout to the hills to everyone, but I guess that's not exactly pragmatic. Plus, arguably, there could be a reason for the bloody room. It is a farm. Suspicion, anyway, leads me to going upstairs, following the very obvious power cord to see that something is wrong. A secret room. It's not a very compelling puzzle, honestly, and it's all but solved for you before you even get there. And the twist coming up suffers from the fact that you don't feel like you've achieved anything. Mark is in the hidden room with his legs off. Don't eat the meat. As soon as we can, we forget about the dying friend in front of us and race downstairs to stop the group eating Mark's legs.
They could use some goddamn manners.
You're eating human meat.
Now, I picked the option that is very blunt, and in retrospect, I don't know if that was the best option. It frightened the kids and it put everyone on edge, rather than them digesting the information. However, that dialogue option, being on a timer, forced my hand into that decision as I acted on instinct, and that feels quite dynamic. I didn't say the exact calculated thing in the moment. The events were too fleeting and they took me with them. At the very least, I stopped Clem from eating anyone. Mark pokes his head in to reinforce the point before we are knocked out and find ourselves locked in cold storage. Kenny is at his limit here. His wife and son are missing, and he's just seen people eating other humans. And I don't mean zombies, I mean actual living human people. Understandably, the tensions are getting higher and higher, and this pushes the Kenny-Linny debacle to a new level, with Larry's heart popping at the climax once again. I have no sympathy for this man, and when Kenny points out that the dead turn, bitten or otherwise, he does have a point. However, I don't immediately advocating for solidifying his unalive status. Kenny's panicked immediate reaction to splat Larry's head is justifiable. He may even have done the best thing in retrospect, but you'd hope he'd be understanding of us not immediately resorting to the same kind of actions.
I don't want to hear it, Lee. You think I like doing what I did? I'm the guy who couldn't bear to watch the family dog get put down. But if we want to survive this shit, we gotta have the balls to do the hard thing. Or at least one of us has got to.
No, he doesn't. He doesn't understand one bit. By not immediately deciding on this path, we have had the surprising effect of making Kenny absolutely loathe us. Larry is dead, and that can't change, and what also hasn't changed is our need to escape. Luckily, by looting Larry's body for change, we can utilise Clem's slight build and end up escaping. Except for Larry, of course, he's still dead. Kenny shoots off to find his family, and we follow after him, picking up a single weapon on our way. And I mean only a single weapon, with the game making Lee make the absurd decision to drop one weapon for another despite having two hands, a previously unlimited inventory, and others around to pass things to. And it takes you out of the moment, reminding that you are in a game bound by its rules. This is the equivalent of hitting the edge of an open world map bound by an invisible wall. Even a hand wave of an explanation is better than this. We end up in the main barn area again, and after a quick sneaking section we are fighting with Danny Boy. This guy would be eating people, apocalypse or not. Despite getting the drop on him, he ends up with the advantage, with the rifle aimed directly at us. And Kenny does F all. Despite us saving Duck at Herschel's farm and looking out for his family for the last 2 episodes, disagreeing with Kenny for one decision in order to not kill someone in a heat of the moment, it kind of just breaks his brain, making him willing to let us die. There are certain actions that drastically change people, but the stock Kenny puts into his family is somewhat questioned by the overemphasis The Walking Dead puts on that Larry decision, as the mechanics don't match with his priorities outside of these decisions. After overpowering Danny, he goes full on psychopath, telling us,
See? You understand now, don't you? You can have me. It's how the world works now. Get part of yourself so others can live.
honestly, I would not be comfortable knowing that this fella was alive. I'm all for mercy, but if I want to sleep soundly, Danny has to die. Clem showing up after the fact feels a bit unfair. It kind of makes it out like this decision to stop the psychopath was more brutal than it appeared, but I wouldn't have made her watch if I could help it. But anyway, moving on, we hear Kat at odds with Brenda. We are literally in a hostage negotiation. This is a unique moment where we have control of Lee, but pushing too far will spook Brenda into shooting us. We get closer and closer to Brenda, choosing not to provoke the woman with the gun as she shuffles slowly back. We need to be calm and pragmatic here, cautiously reacting to Brenda's natural responses. This is probably the best single piece of gameplay in the whole of The Walking Dead Season 1, at least in abstract. It takes everything that is core to this game, its characters and environments, and it makes you use them to solve a pivotal problem. Is everything that The Walking Dead should be in a puzzle. However, the execution is a bit mixed. It's not terrible, but it's a bit too easy to spook Brenda or muck this bit up. While this should be a difficult confrontation, you need a bit of time to understand what is possible in this very very unique and individual section. And again, even more importantly, the consequences of an immediate game over and restart takes away a lot of that tension and impact away from the scene. This is where I think it was imperative to have different consequences dependent on how you approach this negotiation. Even if them consequences are relatively small, such as Katja reacting negatively towards us for risking her life if we are careless and don't take our time in negotiating down Brenda from the brink. It takes away by having only one solution that we just have to kind of push for. At least it's a decent one, with her slowly shuffling back towards Mark, who we can see in the background, who is zombified and is ready to snatch up Brenda. Going forward, only one of the St. Johns remains, the older brother, Andy, and he has Duck. Again, Carly saves the day and shoots Andy, though only grazing him, but this does give us enough time to tackle Andy, letting Duck get to safety. This is a fight to the death that is mainly conducted in QTEs. Not the greatest, but it's not all just button mashing. When we are on top of Andy, we can punch him, and I choose to give him a few before laying off, thinking I've won this fight, and not wanting to go overboard, I stop. Remarkably, the game acknowledges this. Having a dynamic choice mid-fight that isn't prompted or highlighted makes the game actually show what a video game can do with interactive storytelling as opposed to a choose-your-own storybook. We end the fight telling Andy that it is over. His family are dead, zombies are coming, and the rest of the group are here to back Lee up. He's broken, wanting to fight, most likely to the death, as everything around him has gone.
Yeah, walk away from me, Lee!
We can give him his wish, or we can end him. I leave it be. Killing him now would be in pure anger, though it would maybe save against a potential retaliation, but there was also a part of me here that wanted to see that if he survived, would that play a part in the future? To my surprise, the game doesn't end there, and instead we unpack the aftermath of the episode on the trek back towards the motel. We get the video recorder back and chat with Kenny. He asks what we think, and honestly, the options are all a bit too similar for my liking, something that hasn't really been the case for most decisions. I'd like to be more pragmatic with my dialogue options, saying that it was a hard choice, that I didn't agree with him, but I understand him though. Instead, we can just berate him or stay stum. I choose to do the latter. He's still not a happy bunny though, despite us not having a go at him here, and this just doesn't fit, and it feels awkward, like his reaction is predetermined and his justification is worked backwards. He even mentioned us saving Duck over Sean earlier. Yes, people aren't always logical, and this isn't far from the intensity of the moment, but we just saved his family again. Give us a break. At least I get to explain to Clem why I killed Danny. That is somewhat more aligned to what I was going for. Just before the episode closes, we come to a fully stocked car. It has everything we need. Most of the group want to take its content, but some are worried, Clem especially, as they think it may belong to someone. Thus, we are given a choice. Vote to take everything or to leave it. This choice shouldn't be binary. In this world, an empty car could mean a lot of different things, and leaving everything to go to waste is not really an option we can take. But not waiting around or scouting for anyone, if not just for the sake of preventing retaliation, seems very illogical. But it comes down to take it or leave it, and my soppiness and Clem's reluctance is enough for me to say no. Maybe we could come back? Most people hate me for this decision, but Clem doesn't, and she's been through a lot, and I think she needs someone on her side. The group ends up outvoting me and takes the food anyway, making this cold bit kind of redundant. This confirms that hunger won't be the main driving force for the next episode, and while it's a long-term issue and something that's cool to explore, I think everyone being hungry and weak has kind of run its course in terms of dynamic storytelling. We've seen the kind of depravity that people can get to if they get to starving, though we haven't really experienced as much of that as I kind of wanted to, with our decisions to ration the food out earlier kind of really not making a difference after getting that food from the dairy. Carly managed to find some batteries in the supply, hands one to Clem for her broken radio and one to Lee for the video recorder. It plays this.
Jake, Bart, Linda, and all y'all fucking sickos from the save lots. They call y'all bandits, but you're fucking racist, what? Oh, darling baby, look at you. Look at you. Oh, you need a mama, sweetheart. We won't let them bandits get you where
We're doing Clementine.
Okay,
Where's your hat?
I don't know. Can you help me find it?
Sure. When did you lose it?
I had it a couple days ago.
I promise. If I find it,
You're
I'll let
safe.
you know.
Sitting there acting like things are the way they used to be. The dead don't kill their own. It's the living you gotta be afraid of. The people I used to call friends. People. Don't worry, little girl. Bandits got their eye on that dairy. As long as they keep getting food from them, you'll be safe.
Jolene, that bandit we bumped into the bandit clearing, has obviously gone through hell, but revealing this as a kind of twist at the end of the episode does nothing. It explains her erratic attitude, but she wasn't really plot relevant enough for that to need a dramatic ending reveal. What does this video provide? Arguably, this suggests that we will see more about the bandits, and maybe we'll see the fallout of her actions and her obsession with Lee and Clem. To be fair, the bandits are more of an enigma than ever. Did they have a deal with the farm? Did they provide people for meat? Do they know about the cannibalism occurring? This kind of questioning and being in the midst of warring factions could possibly make this ending scene work, but if I had to describe this episode in one word, it would be clunky. There may be a reason for it, as the development of this particular episode was probably the most difficult, with plenty of changes being made. I'll mention them a bit in more detail later, but what we were left with did feel a bit kind of cobbled together. In terms of settings, the actual St. John's farm is quite fleshed out, and it's much more detailed than anywhere else in the story, and it's got a nice blend of calm country life with a creeping danger that ramps up and up until the eating people reveal. The characters do a good job of keeping you on edge. However, I never really trusted the brothers to begin with, and I think that anyone would find that hard to do so, and without believing them to be good, the twist doesn't really work. Danny's perverted, creepy interest in the horror of everything is not counterbalanced by the rest of the family. You can optionally investigate more of the barn and see some dodgy things on the farm, making the reveal that they are eating people just like the Walkers are more satisfactory. The reveal is fitting for the plot and for the theme of the episode, but it doesn't hit as hard as it possibly could. The feel of disjointedness takes away from the good things this episode does, as you're too busy questioning things that never end up being that important, instead of focusing on the intrigue of what is the core of this episode. I think it's supposed to feel a bit like a twist that the real bad guys are the St. John's, not the bandits, but with how much time was dedicated to the bandits, including the ending, it feels like we know nothing more about them apart from that they are bad. Despite this clunk, this episode is an interesting development from the first, getting away from the confusion and panicked outbreak and instead exploring the harsh realities of survival, something that The Walking Dead is great at in all of its formats.
Does it look dumb?
No, you look cute, and a lot harder to grab.
I keep looking at this graphical overhaul at the beginning of episodes because it adds a dynamic and mood that I didn't quite expect when I first started. I can't revel in the glory of this as Kenny is being a dick again. I really wish he would get over it. Remember, I saved your kid, but he's itching to leave the motel. It's a dangerous place at the moment and Macon has been ransacked. In fact, we are trying to get everything we can from Lee's family's pharmacy. I did check, but the camera avoids you getting close to where Lee's brother lay deceased, and I think that's a bit of a missed opportunity, and I don't know why they haven't decided to go there. We're on our way into the pharmacy when a girl bursts from nowhere out at the end of the road, screaming her head off, attracting every undead from all around. Before we get a chance to save her, she is bitten, and we know this is a death sentence. We can put her out of her misery or leave her as a distraction. Interesting question though, I think it would hit more if we knew this woman. I made the hard choice to let her inevitable death lead us to safety. There was little to be done, and with the amount of traffic at her end of the all-you-can-eat buffet, I don't think she'll be in misery for long anyway. We get inside and the alarm once again goes off inside the pharmacy. We have to grab everything as quickly as possible before it gets too dangerous. I think that time must be longer with our distraction not being silenced. I managed to grab everything and head to safety before another repeated QTE. Obviously we get to safety, but no thanks to Kenny, who leaves us to die. I saved your kid! Why can't you call him out for being an arse? Arguably, this shows that his main priorities are not his family, but whether or not you are loyal to him. But this doesn't seem right, and instead I just get annoyed at the game and not the character. In contrast, Larry was hateable, but I enjoyed hating him. Kenny seems to be hot-headed, and I don't mind that showing up in his character, but his lingering hatred for minor quibbles direct my ire towards the game, as it feels like a bad execution of the dilemmas you face. Moving away from Kenny, when the pair get back to the motel, we can see it absolutely absolutely littered with arrows. The bandits are about, it seems, but everyone at the camp seems to be okay, at least physically. Clem seems to have decorated her radio, which he plays make-believe with. It's quite a sad but understandable coping technique for the little girl. When we see Lily to show her the take of the supplies that we've got, she doesn't share the enthusiasm you'd expect from my great pro gamer skills when I got everything possible. It's still looking like slim pickings to her as she's prepping to survive the winter here at the motel, something Kenny is dead against, wanting to find a warmer climate, a shore and perhaps a boat. Lily is definitely on edge and even explains that supplies are being stolen. She seems broken and paranoid, but she asks us to look into it.
We don't toss out equipment, we fix it. You'd only try to get rid of a flashlight if you were using it when you shouldn't.
Okay, I'll poke around a little bit.
A mystery.
Duck scares us as we leave her. We haven't actually seen much of him in the last couple of episodes. He's just an oddball but lovable in his own way when he's popped up here and there over the last couple of episodes. He's even more lovable as he wants to be Robin to our detective Batman.
What did I just say?
You're the Grace detective, and I can be Dick Grayson, your ward. That's Robin.
I know who it is. Okay, you're Robin.
Yes. What do I do?
I don't know. Go look around. Let me know if you find anything weird.
I'm on the case.
Well, I let him play about and possibly help us. Before we do so, Carly has something important to talk to us about, and Lee thinks he's in here.
I think about you too.
You're a convicted killer.
Carly.
You don't have to tell everyone, but think about who you trust and take the opportunity while you have it.
And here I was thinking that Lee was about to get... Oh, fair enough. It's catch-up time, like in last episode. But this time we do have that optional choice to let people know about our past. It's interesting having more time to analyse this decision, and a whole lot of breadth in the decision as we can tell any mix of people about it. Well, I end up telling everyone, as I think it would get out eventually if you tell one person. I do wish the game would let you just make an announcement if you want to make that choice, as you end up having the same conversation with everyone, admittedly with different responses and different nuances. It's especially weird that I asked Kat and Kenny in turn for some privacy, just to tell them the same thing anyway. This is a minor hiccup though. One person in the group that we know the least about is probably Ben, the guy on watch at the moment. He's very timid, he's anxious, and he tends to go with the group. He can easily be overlooked as a man. The graphics that define the bum fluff on his upper lip are not easily distinguishable from a more coarse beard. Ben is a teenager though, and has moments where this is more apparent. No one is wiser about the missing supplies, it seems, but we have a smashed torch, and looking over to the far end of the motel we can find glass that matches the broken lamp. Next to the broken glass is a conspicuous pink chalk cross. This looks like a sign, it's certainly a clue. Well, luckily we have Junior Detective Duck on the case. Clem has been using chalk to make leaf rubbings but says she's lost the pink chalk a while back, so it's not her. In fact, we get proof that she didn't have that pink chalk as Duck has found it and tells us exactly where he did.
I was combing the scene for clues and...
Yeah, Duck, I got it. Good job.
He's done a good job despite Lee's exasperation, and we can choose to high-five him. This is optional, and I know this as when I first played this, well, up 10 years ago, I didn't even see that he wanted a high-five and properly blanked the poor bastard, and that's probably the most evil thing you can do in The Walking Dead. If you high-five him, you get a little message from the UI stating that Duck thinks you're incredibly awesome. We are awesome, but it's a fun little play on how the game gently hints and how it explains how the game is functioning. These little tidbits of information have become so ubiquitous with Telltale that the iconic, Blank will remember this, became a meme at the time. But why do Telltale put these messages in the game? It doesn't tell us anything about how to play the game, and we are far beyond the time when we needed to be reminded that people change their opinion of you. It also portrays a storytelling faux pas that you should show, not tell. If Kenny will remember that, and believe me, he will, then this should be portrayed in how the character reacts. The model animation changes and the voice acting should display the emotional impact of your decision. There should be no need to tell you what people think, and this can take away from any ambiguity of the situation. The Walking Dead, at least for season 1, does a great job of showing people's reactions. The voice acting is exquisite, and the models, while stylized, do a good job of conveying mood, sometimes to a comical extent. Lee's mad underbite is glorious, and most of the time the way a character reacts in tone and look works and doesn't go overboard, though there are certainly times this isn't the case. So the little message does seem redundant, but the purpose isn't to actually tell you what is going on with the characters, but to reinforce the idea that you're making an impact on this world, just like that opening text at the beginning of the game states. This certainly does have the intended effect. It's easy to be drawn into the feeling of empowerment this creates, as this was the selling point of the game, its main focus. This is hammered home at every opportunity, to the extent that the Telltale messaging has had its edge dulled by the constant use of it. This overuse may have somewhat been preempted with the choice to turn the UI to minimal at the beginning of the game. However, doing so creates a separate issue, and that is because of how many unique gameplay elements there can be when it comes to action. We've seen a lot of these so far, and the variety of ways you get to control Lee is quite astonishing, and this means that you often have no idea what is and what is not possible. Some scenes you do not control the movement of the character, and then suddenly you need to do so to force yourself away from the undead. As you have no idea that you can do this at the time, without the hints at the top leading you, you can easily end up having an annoying preventable death. So that gives you two options, one where everything is over explained, including puzzle hints, character reactions and mechanical instructions, or the option of having nothing at all where you inevitably will slip up if you're playing blind. More UI options would be a real godsend, because even in this retrospective where I'm going to record these UI messages, I would have turned off all the puzzle clues, as I think they ruin that puzzle element of the game. Despite me going on about them, I still have a soft spot for these little bits of text at the top, and that is no small part down to the fact that Telltale often play with it, such as Duck thinking here that we are incredibly awesome. Back to the story, we eventually find that there are supplies being hidden in a vent on the outside of the complex. The game cuts to a chat with Lily, but we get interrupted by the bandits attacking, with the rest of the group being rounded up. We go to distract them while Lily jumps out the window to get a good angle with her rifle. It's made quite clear that someone was making a deal with these bandits, supplies and drugs for peace. It's so obvious that Lee already offers to extend the deal while buying time. This is the first time we've had direct communication with this bandit group. Remember, I was hoping that this would elaborate on some of the questions I had about the bandits from the last episode. What really went down with Jolene? Why are they so aggressive? Are there other survivors of the school massacre apart from Ben? None of this gets even close to being answered, because Lily is a class shot and Carly manages to pull it out of the bag again. There is a short shooting section here that, while primitive, adds an extra dimension to The Walking Dead. It's enough to get the action flowing and doesn't stay around long enough for its overly simplistic nature to show its very obvious flaws. Chaos erupts, but everyone safely gets through the emerging Firefly and zombie follow-up and into Kenny's van. The decision has been made for the group: we have to leave. While this does mean we are leaving so much promising story beats behind in Macon, and this somewhat diminishes the impact of the last episode, the pace and the execution of the last few moments have been exhilarating and gives The Walking Dead a needed kick up the bum. We are again in a tense, bottled area with everyone at each other's throats. Lily especially. Her paranoia has only grown since losing her dad, not helped by the fact that her conspiracy theories were actually proven correct. The intensity of this all has been brought down to bear, and she's attacking everyone, blaming them for this shit show we are now in. Strangely, Kenny does escape most of the blast as he is driving. The argument takes the side of the road as Kenny has to dislodge a walker from the caravan's wheels. Fresh air might be exactly what is needed.
What do I have to do for you to trust me? I'll do anything! I'll do watches for months.
Or maybe not. This prosecution is going too far and it's being done in the wrong way. We plead and Carly even gets shirty with Lily for her dictatorial mannerisms.
Need any more evidence than this? Fuck evidence! Stop treating him like this!
Shut up, Carly.
Ugh, I've heard enough out of you!
Now, what the fuck's the problem?
Lily must have thought the whole world was against her, with her paranoia finally exploding with her killing the most reliable character in the group. This is unforgivable. She killed a member of the group, and I choose to leave Lily to Walker justice. TM. She'd gone too far, and for moral and practical reasons there was no way she was riding in that caravan with us for any more time. Well, at least it can't get any worse.
Lee, a word please?
Is Duck feeling all right?
Oh, bother. Kenny is a bit hypocritical here with his denial of reality, what with Larry and all. But I think we all would be a bit hypocritical when it comes to our own children. And with everything going on around us, I think it's not great to push sorting this issue straight away. At least I hope it's not going to bite me in the back, literally or otherwise.
East.
Guys.
What else is there to do? We thought you should know.
and breathe. This episode has chosen to abandon the vague bandit Macon plot, but what they have given us in return is one hell of a ride. From the bandit attack and hostage situation, to getting on the road, Lily and her persecution of Ben, Carly's death, and finally Duck being bitten. We haven't had time to rest and recuperate from the events that have come thick and fast in this episode. We get a chance to process everything when we come to a blockade in the form of a train parked on a crossing. We get to look around and also do that usual thing of reconnecting with everyone. However, due to the circumstances, not everyone is in the mood to discuss everything right now. Exploring around, we realise that the train could actually still be functioning, and what's more is that it's heading in the direction of the coast via the city of Savannah, where Clementine's family most likely perished. The only thing that comes across as egregious in this part is Ben, the teenager who might have indirectly caused the issues that occurred. Well, he's frustrated he can't work on the train and is instead asked to look after the kids, but I feel like that's the least of his worries right now. We can get things going if we detach one of the carriages from the rest of the train. The issue is that the instructions have been ripped away from the notepad that they were on. The solution is ingenious, as the instructions are still visible on the next page after doing some kind of leaf rubbing. The clever part is not the solution itself, but the fact that Clem had alluded to the answer with her chalk earlier in the episode. The puzzle here is seamlessly tied to earlier events without the stretching the plausibility of them, and the chalk had already served a purpose in the story beforehand, so it's not like it's come out of nowhere. The whole idea of using leaf rubbings is actually quite simple, but only because we're primed by the narrative to think it. The biggest crime would be is if they didn't give you a chance to figure out this puzzle for yourself.
I can kind of see the indentations from the writing.
And Lee tells you exactly what you need to do when he first investigates the notes, and if you do have the UI not on minimum, then you will get the answer as well without having to do a single bit of problem solving yourself. What a waste. He could have said this line if you'd spent a while trying to work it out and not getting anywhere, or maybe after asking Clem for help, but instead you're not trusted to work it out for yourself despite the hidden hints from the plot. Once we get everything in order and the train is once again running, there's a surprise visitor. Well, maybe we should say that we're his surprise visitor, as he's been living in this train carriage for a fairly long while. Luckily, he seems quite chill and even asks to come along, and as he seems quite chill and we need the extra manpower now, I agree. Setting out on the train, we can see that Duck is only getting worse. Although Kat is in heartache, she has accepted something has to happen, and we have to ask Kenny to stop the train so we can deal with Duck. Kenny is in denial though, and convincing him to stop the train isn't an easy task.
You need to stop the train.
There is an Easter egg here if we aren't able to get Kenny to stop the train. For example, if we just stay totally silent when talking to him, then he will shut us out of the driver's compartment, leaving us with no option but to return to Kat. This might be slightly comical. Lee's lack of reaction and the immediate death of all on board is played out as pretty silly, but I think it's quite interesting that the developers seem to deem it an Easter egg when it really just shows us what is at stake by failing to get Kenny to stop the train. I hope I'm never in the situation where I need to help a man come to his senses over his child dying, and honestly, I don't know how I'd approach it, but as Lee I have to try. I try to be straight with the facts, telling him he's in denial in a kind but forthright way.
You're in denial!
And you've given up! On Duck! On everyone!
Stop it, goddammit!
Well, Lee, you could have used a bit more tact than that. That's not how I imagined that response playing out. I think this misjudgment on my part highlights the connotations of some lines that are quite easily misinterpretable. Some games mark dialogue choices with tone or even morality, explicitly telling you what tone you are conveying. This could help here, as tone doesn't just change the way you express content, but it can change the content itself, especially when half of the message that you're trying to convey is that you're empathetic, just like in this case. But to be honest, without giving a definitive script of every option with direct markings, it's hard to sum up any expression in a few words. So in this case, while I do feel misrepresented by my option, I do understand why, and overall, The Walking Dead does very good by summing up what you're trying to say in these short snippets of text. However, this misinterpretation does lead me to doing what I feel is a gaming sin and restarting this scene. While playing narrative-driven games, I try and go with the flow, embrace things that might not always go my way. This is my preference, but any way people play is valid, obviously. But for me, it feels in keeping with how stories really develop, and it feels more personal and in keeping with the developer's intentions of you embodying these different characters. In this case, though, I feel that the mistake was more on the game's fault than mine. I may be wrong, but this wasn't the Lee that I had been playing, that I had been embodying, and for me that was enough for me to restart this scene.
Katja needs you, Kenny.
Duck will be fine.
I'm sorry. I shouldn't talk like that right now.
Go back there and tell my wife everything will be fine. What is the goddamn deal? He's a little sick, but we can't just quit. It's a scratch. He's not like the others. Jesus, all y'all are just making it worse.
Knock this shit off.
So, you want to fight then?
I just want to talk, Ken. Relax.
Then talk.
You think you're the reason Duck was bitten? Like you had this coming or something? You didn't kill Herschel's son.
Yes, I did. And now it's catching up to me.
That's not what went down. You looked out for your kid, and a bad thing happened to someone else's.
There ain't no way this world lets my son live when I help put someone else's in the ground.
That's not the way it works. You know that. Stop the train, man.
This conversation is easily the hardest hitting so far. Other incidents and story beats have been stressful, emotional, and the writing has done a good job of luring you in. But this conversation, and the fact that you're actively making choices within it, is just something else. Getting off the train doesn't make things easier, as everyone sees the writing on the wall. Even Kenny knows, as he pleads with Kat for some loophole, some way out, something in order for what is about to happen not to happen. The conversation turns to practical matters. As I think about this decision, I think that Kenny wouldn't forgive himself for not dealing with it himself. He was Duck's dad and he tried to be his protector. And maybe I should have stayed quiet, but I tell Kenny that
you're his dad. You do it.
And I'm his mother.
Kat, who is also his guardian, feels that she has come more to terms with it all and will kill Duck and stopping this once energetic, fun-loving boy turning into a monster.
Then I'm coming with you.
No, hon, stay with Lee. Your son loves you, and you should remember him as the silly boy we used to have. Not this.
Duck is one of the first characters that we met, and now he's carried away with his mum to die.
Katja's taking care of Duck.
I thought he was going to die.
She's putting him out of his misery. Yeah. Look, Clem, things are...
Kat! Katja!
She thought she could do it. I certainly believed her, but the shot never reached Duck. Kat is an understated character, and her change of heart may seem out of the blue, but I believe that this burden finally getting to her, breaking her, actually makes her character even deeper and much more heartbreaking. What would you do? There's no right answer here. There never will be, but I think that Kenny needs to do this for himself, as I said earlier. He is a man that takes responsibility, even when he shouldn't. Giving that up now would haunt him for the rest of his life, more than it already will. I convince him to end Duck's suffering.
It'll be okay. It'll be...
The scene floats out and ends on such a beautiful image of this clearing in the woods. The autumn leaves, orange glow blending with the dark red blood, Kenny's lost family. The train ride back is very subdued, as you'd expect. Kenny is silent and broken, and everyone else ain't far off. As always, we check on Clementine. I'm hardly keeping it together, and I'm an adult playing through a lens of another character. How can a girl cope? Well, apparently she isn't.
What happened to Duck? What happened to me?
And that homeless Chuck guy told her that she will end up like Duck. Why would you do such an evil thing? Chuck says he's just being brutally honest with her and points out that she needs to know how to use a gun. She needs to cut her hair short, though his is fairly long, I should point out. And then he says that we don't even have a plan. Yes, in all honesty, these are good points, and I concede as much. But there are better ways to prepare a girl than just telling her she's going to die, like her friend just did. I feel like I can take these points on board and still put my foot down here. He could have talked to Lee about how to better prepare Clementine, or if he's insistent on talking to the girl, he could at least give her advice instead of deadly premonitions. Failing to get him to see sense, we go to do what Chuck has suggested. There's a slightly infuriating little segment here where you need to get a map of Savannah, but Kenny is in the way and you can't get him to move or pass it to you as he wants his space. It all makes a bit of sense, but it feels a bit forced. But getting some whiskey for him and Chuck does the trick. As we're about to go through all these life lessons with Clem, we pass Ben, who has been silently on edge since we left the motel. It comes out the most obvious admission of all time.
I was the one giving the bandits supplies.
What?
Odds are that you probably realised it's likely Ben, and he actually had a fair few good reasons for doing what he did. Remember, he apparently saw his whole school community brutalised by the bandits. He knows that the farm originally paid them off, and arguably his plan to lessen the violence worked until we got in the way. I still think he was wrong to do this behind everyone's backs, but at least it was understandable, even if he does a bad job of explaining that himself.
Why'd you have to go and tell me that?
No,
just don't tell anybody. You can't take any of it back, so don't.
He wants to tell Kenny that it was him who made the deal with the bandits, as he thinks that this plan to deal with the bandits led to Duck and Kat's death. This is such a stupid idea. Kenny is dealing with losing everyone, and you want to give him an outlet for that? Ben, you do look a lot like Rodney Trotter, but blimey, you do not need to be that much of a plonker, and I tell him as much. But honestly, I wish we could just tell him that it wasn't his fault. What he did was stupid. Telling everyone would even be worse. But the bandits and zombies killed Cat and Duck, not you, Ben. Everything that happened was not on him, even if he didn't help the situation. Anyway, I'm sure that Ben's guilt will never boil over again. There is a bit of needed optimism with this Clementine section as we teach her to shoot in a pathetic minigame of sorts. It requires us to tell her the direction to aim based on where the miss came from. Luckily, the focus is more on the conversation rather than on that terrible bit of gameplay. Lee has grown closer than ever with her, and her reaction to having her hair cut is sweet, childish, but also simplistically poignant.
How hard can it be?
I'm going to look like a boy.
This conversation also reinforces the deepening paternal relationship between the two. They have been a pair since the first episode and they've become more codependent since then. This whole section with Lee and Clem is about survival, about teaching how to be in this new world, and how they, as a pair, will look forward within the gradually fractured group or without it.
Does it look dumb?
No, you look cute and a lot harder to grab.
I'm glad we have a plan.
And you're a good little shot.
Thanks.
I guess we should see how far.
Oh, shit! Hold on, everybody!
The train slows down, and this is because there's an obstruction in the way. An overturned fuel lorry is dangling off a bridge and is in the way of the train. This is a bit of an overly dramatic obstacle, but hey ho. As we go to check this out in more detail, Lee being the obvious choice to go up the service ladder, we meet a couple of strangers. They seem fairly friendly enough, but so did the St. John's. Well, except for Danny, of course. Hesitantly, we get up the bridge, interrogate the two, and have a look about and see what the mess is like from above. The two are Omid and Krista. I choose to warn them about Kenny as he isn't in the right place at this point in time. Lee chooses the most dramatic way to do so, and I love him for it.
Kenny lost his wife and kid.
Man, how long ago?
What time is it?
They're obviously keeping stuff back, but they pass the vibes check and go down to meet the rest of the small gang we have left. Looking about, we can see the fuel tank is badly attached to the actual lorry and could be coupled if we had the right tools, but there ain't any up here. But a service station down the way may do the trick. After another chance to get up to speed with everyone, we learn that Omid is a big old nerd like Lee.
He wanted the great American road trip.
Well, he got a little more than he bargained for, huh?
Who the hell is into Civil War history anyway, other than old white guys? Wonderful.
And after, we head down to the service station.
Can I follow you over there?
She'll have to learn how to survive someday, and having someone to watch our back doesn't hurt, but I can't help but get a tinge of nervous dad energy putting her near a danger. You can tell that I've fully bought into this relationship at this point. She shows her use immediately, being able to unlock the door when on our shoulders. It's very dark inside, but we can prop open the door for light. However, the game will not let us use anything sensible to do so, like the box right in front of us or the paint cans outside, and instead makes us use our big rouse bike, our only weapon. This is frustrating as you can't help but be taken out of the game by meta thoughts as to why the game wants you not to have a weapon at this point. The way that we're separated from this weapon is so contrived that it's hard not to feel cheated out of it. Just to our luck, there is a blowtorch inside. I don't know the cultural context to whether this is believable or not, so I just accept it as a given. The blowtorch is behind a locked gate and the key is there too. There's a way inside though, as the gate doesn't go all the way to the ceiling, and a Clementine-sized person could be lifted over and pass us the key. Well, what do you know? We have one of those. You know, this isn't going to end well, and it feels a bit contrived again, but certainly less so than before. It's more of a video game trope, as the game is insisting on us taking this action, and we kind of can see it going that way. After boosting her, it's not Clem who's in danger though, it's us, and a couple of zombies slowly lurch towards us, making us retreat back towards our weapon, away from Clem. One goes down by quickly selecting the weapon, and then the face of the walker. The next is a bit more trouble, and we get a QTE. I love this comical face from Lee as he breathes some air after dealing with those bastards, but the juxtaposition between him and Clem is devastating. Her shivering in anxiety, guilt and stress is heartbreakingly real. She choked, she couldn't shoot. Not unreasonable for an 8-year-old girl, but you just want to hug her and tell her it's alright, but it isn't. There is another one in the cell with her. We can't protect her from here, and she is a nervous wreck, but she pulls through enough to get the key to us. That puts us in the way, and we finish it off with Clem's gun. Krista turns up and continues to be her abrupt self. She's either not that impressed with us, or this is how she displays her worry about the cruelties of the world with an 8-year-old in it. After that, Lee and Clem both need a debrief. I choose to tell her that everything is dangerous and you always need to be alert in these situations. Hopefully that will be helpful for her going forward. We get back to the bridge and use the blowtorch with Omid's help in order to break the fuel tanker free. It's all going somewhat to plan until an absolute horde of zombies start approaching the train. They may have been following us since Macon, collecting more as they shambled after us. This all gives this difficult task a bit of a time limit, as we need to get out of Dodge quick. I was sure that this was all going to go wrong, but the tanker rolls free and the train starts moving, getting up to speed so it can zoom off once we get aboard. The tanker did unfortunately take the ladder down with it though, and that leaves the history nerds on top of the bridge with nowhere to go. Lee is always quick to act, and he decides that we need to go full action film and jump on the moving train. Before we do so, I quickly press the blowtorch to see if we can. Well, I'm glad that actually worked. It wasn't obvious you could kick that blowtorch down and light the fuel below. And as a player, I feel like my quick thinking was vindicated. Omid doesn't want to jump, so I choose to push him. This doesn't go great, but Lee is able to get into the cab much easier. Omid and Krista are still not inside, and they're running along. Since Omid's leg is not in the greatest of shape, I decide to select to help him in before turning to Krista. He is worried about her and lambasts us for not choosing to help her first, but for once, this decision isn't fatal, and Krista gets in anyway. The episode winds down to its conclusion as we see Clem asleep in the driver's cabin with a drawing of Kenny and his late family, a reminder of what has happened in this very busy episode. Kenny joins us talking about it all, and I don't think there's anything Lee could possibly say to get him through this very hard time. I silently let him grieve.
I'll be alive, I guess. Blood in my heart. Blood in my brain, at least.
I'll leave you to your thoughts. She's out cold like I've never seen.
But that silence is punctuated by the sound of a radio.
What the?
Can't wait for you to get to Savannah, Clementine. I got your parents right here. And you be sure to find me, whether Lee wants you to or not. Now, what I need...
Holy shit.
I thought that fucking thing was broken.
So did I.
Well, it sounds like somebody knows where we're headed.
Who the fuck?
I don't know, but I doubt we're gonna be happy when we find out.
Before we get into that twist, here are my choices. The only one that stands out as unique is my decision to not to shoot Duck myself, but getting Kenny to do so. I obviously explained my reasons, and I'm quite surprised that a vast majority of people disagreed with my reasoning, but that's why we play these games. Where were we again? Yes, this ending has a much stronger reveal than the previous episodes. The radio has been there since we met Clem, and has become her security and connection to her parents and the old way of life. That all might be gone from this world, but someone is using that longing to manipulate her, and we have no idea to what end. This is a serious and personal threat, one that hits the core of what this season of The Walking Dead is about. I think this whole episode has been good at getting to the centre of what makes this game so appealing. It has focused on the key relationships we have formed as Lee and tested them in ways that are dramatic but believable in this harsh reality. While I'm a bit miffed that we didn't get to fully explore the factions of Macon and the speed of which the motel group disintegrated was quite harsh, it all served to push and pull the people left in interesting and new ways. Kenny's core motivation has been removed, and what remains of his character is going to be compelling to explore. The characters we lost will reverberate through him, Ben, Lee and Clem. Ben is at a loose end, his low confidence stretched to breaking point through guilt. This has forced our protagonist to discuss with his ward the possibility of going alone, that the group may not be for the best, and this has solidified their bond further. All these character arcs and moments were on the whole extremely well crafted and portrayed, and the ways that we're able to interact with them felt authentic, heartbreaking, as they tested our ethical assumptions in the face of extreme conditions. There are a few complaints that mainly boil down to plot conveniences and fairly easy puzzles being overly simplified, though you realise that these aren't actually that big a deal when you get down to what is actually driving you forward, and that is the plot and the way you interact with it. Each episode has taken me roughly 2 to 2.5 hours to complete, which is a decent length for each episode, especially factoring that I'm fairly familiar with the game and so probably get through it faster than most would on their first run. I could have sworn that this episode went by much quicker, but checking my recorded footage, it was on par. This shows how engrossed I was with this episode, and it is easily the best episode so far that went by, for me, literally much quicker. Despite being chock-a-blocked with content, this episode still leaves many questions to be answered. This was true with the last episode, but the questions it asked were about external factions and characters, where the cliffhanger this time relates directly to our core group and something that has been around since the beginning of the game. This makes me more confident about them being resolved. Who is this man? Are we being watched as we were with Jolene? And what happens if we come across Clementine's parents? Alive, dead, or undead? We'll have to find out.
Ben? Where did you get that?
I just found it. It was stuck in the door handle at the end of the hallway back there.
There's hardly any time gap between episodes 3 and 4, which is following a trend of them gaps getting smaller each episode. The train was bound for Savannah and we start off episode 4 in that city. It seems deserted, but the only thing on Clem's mind is her walkie-talkie that Lee has not given her back for obvious reasons. Kenny is dead set on finding a boat and escaping to the sea. This was his original plan to begin with, mentioning it to Lee as early as episode 1, but now it's becoming a bit of a fixation. Omid's leg is in a bad way and he needs to rest, but Kenny's one-track mind is making it difficult for him to accept any diversions. The group carry on nervously until...
What kind of church bell goes off at 20 past the hour? Someone's up there!
If I were you, I'd get out of the street now.
The mystery seems to get bigger as it looks like the group are being toyed with a trap going off immediately as we enter the city. The place may look desolate, but it's hiding many walkers and they come out to play on cue. We get a quick chance to help Kenny deal with a walker via first-person shooting, but while we're looking that way, Ben and Clem get surrounded. Ben is bloody useless, leaving her to fend for herself, but luckily Chuck is there to save her. Again, this scene suffers from the animation being underwhelming, with that supposed flood of zombies seeming more like a mere trickle. This has happened before, as we've said, but it isn't the worst example, but it doesn't start the episode off well. However, that radio mystery being at the forefront straight away links the last 2 episodes strongly together, and it shows that that wider narrative is coming to a head here in Savannah. The gang minus Chuck find the relative safety of a posh, well-fenced house that, if they can get inside, would do them a whole lot of good. Krista is deadly worried about Omid and is not the politest when asking to get in. She's quite tetchy as a person and overly protective, and this kind of points that there might be more going on with her than meets the eye. Now we're past that energetic opening. We get that familiar open exploratory area with a chance to see how people are doing and we're given a task to accomplish. The episodes have got a bit formulaic in that sense, but it's not too predictable in how that formula plays out, at least not yet. I've been fully engaging with each person, getting to know them better, asking about them, etc. And this adds a lot to the game as it gives it more colour to each character. And these side chats have small but noticeable effects on minor details throughout the game. The puzzle we need to work out here is how to get into the house while being relatively quiet and maintaining its security. Shooting off the lock would get us in, but for very little gain. The solution is charmingly dark, having us dig up a dead dog using its electronic tag on its collar. However, we just can't reach the handle, and so Clem rushes in through the doggy door, using her size to get in and opening the door proper from the inside. I think if this was real life, I would have shouted at her and told her to never do something so rash and stupid, but I actually get Lee to be that bit more tactful. We are inside the house, but Omid is not doing well and needs to rest. Ben looks after Clem, and Kenny and I go to explore the house in order to not be surprised by something loitering in the shadows.
Hope we never get desperate enough for food that this starts looking appetizing.
But what about the episode where everyone nearly died of hunger? There are a few occasions of dialogue being a bit quirky and not really kind of lining up, and that's often down to choices that you've made not being accounted for properly, and I bring it up when it occurs, but it doesn't occur too many times. But this dog food line is contradictory to a whole episode's theme. It's not a big deal, but it's a bit sloppy. This had to happen at least once, and it kind of made me snort, as I'm easily pleased by a cheesy joke. It also gives you that little bit of comical relief before we deal with the next scene. Kenny was checking the first floor while we were securing the ground floor. While searching, he found the stairs to the attic. He went up to take a look, and he hasn't been heard of since. We go to have a look, and another emotionally difficult scene to endure occurs. Kenny is just kneeling on the attic floor, silent, bereft. After having to go through the loss of losing his own child, Kenny has been confronted with an undead boy of similar age and look to Duck. This kid starved to death and is weak and broken, and Kenny is much the same. The story of this boy is crippling sad as it is, but it's tying it back to Kenny and how he is struggling to deal with his own loss. It's just a sucker punch. It isn't out of the blue either, as there's enough clues around the house to show us that a boy should be living here. Kenny's plight has made me so invested with this game, and that isn't changing anytime soon. We can see his character unravel before our eyes. His quick temper is not being sated by his family, and he's becoming more and more dangerous in his single-mindedness. He was already teetering on the edge, but this could push him over. We need to keep an eye on him. While I made sure Kenny didn't regret leaving Duck, I don't think he needs to go through this again, not yet at least. I choose to deal with the child walker myself. Kenny insists on burying him, and we do, next to his dog.
Hey! Hey!
It's a different sort of terror being stalked, especially as we don't know his motivation, but his grooming of Clem points to it not being anything except for being nefarious. With that man playing on our mind, Kenny convinces us to head down to the harbour to scout out a boat we can use to escape this dense city filled with monsters both alive and dead. When we get to the harbour, it's pretty empty as you can expect. This town is coming like a ghost town. Any dead that have been skulking around are also lured away by another bell going off in the distance. Considering it's been months since the outbreak and many people must have thought that seclusion was the only option, it's a bit weird that Kenny is shocked that there's no working boats around, but his overwhelming persistence to the plan is getting to the point of derangement, and he asks us to use the dockside telescope to scout up and down the shoreline for anything seaworthy. This isn't simple, as we need to put in some money to get it working, something we haven't needed to hold on to for a while. The solution is pretty easy though, and maybe a bit too easy, as we can smash a newspaper holder to get some cash. Before we do, we use this as a chance to look about. There is some really weird stuff going down in this city. All around us we can see weird signs on doors that look cult-like in nature, but could point to some sort of government intervention. More noteworthy is the mound of dead corpses that have been fastened into an undead barricade. The logic of using decaying bodies as fixed battlements aside, why has someone gone through the trouble of making such a thing? The obvious answer is to keep people away, and it does do the job, but it does it a little too well. We have to park this thought to the side and get back to Kenny's boat delusion. There are no boats around. Looking around some more, we can come across a person who looks familiar to the person we saw on top of the church earlier. Taking cover with Kenny, we sneak up on them, but as soon as we get close, they conveniently duck down. I kind of knew that they were onto us. A quick fight ensues and we parry their attacks, we get the upper hand and we force them down at gunpoint. Is this the person that's been stalking us? No, obviously, they look nothing alike. The person behind the fence earlier may have been in shadow, but we could kind of make out an older male physique. The revelation that this is someone else, a girl nonetheless, isn't as big of a deal as I think the developers hoped it would be. This unknown female loses her aggression towards us when she sees Clem, who was supposed to be staying with Ben. Ben! Kenny pops round the corner, but before he can shoot this lady, still thinking her hostile, she knocks him to the floor, sending his shot to fire well wide. In the aftermath, we learn a bit about Savannah, both past and present. Molly, this lady, was the one ringing the bells, but she was just using it as a way to herd zombies into one area before looting another. Knowing nothing of our group, she unwittingly led a horde towards us earlier. She also explains that the barricade was set up by a group called Crawford, a dictatorship set up soon after the world started ending. It has a zero tolerance policy on those who can't pull their weight, including children. Hence why she eased up on us after she saw Clementine. Before we can learn anything else, more zombies arrive. Our escape through an alley is cut off, but although Molly isn't the greatest team player, she relents to help pull us up to the safety of some overhanging fire escapes. It's a little bit too late for Lee and we need to find some other way out. The amount of time you have to save Lee is actually absurd. I thought that I had hardly any time, but turns out I had loads of time to stroll towards a manhole, have Molly throw down the multi-tool before using it to escape to the sewers. If I felt pressured by time, this could have been quite scary, but instead I was just kind of bewildered instead. Whether it's Mario, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, or indeed The Walking Dead, there is always an underground level. Lee may be stranded, but he's relatively safe as the zombies that fall down with him don't do so with any grace. Lee needs to get through the sewers, but water pressure and a few zombies are in the way. The game tasks us with working out a way to manipulate the zombies and using the valves so that we can get through. I wouldn't say that this puzzle is good though, as it flatters to deceive. I ended up interacting with the valves I encountered in the order I encountered them, and everything just seemed to work well. The little bit of stealth I needed to do was just a case of turning a corner at the right time, never once feeling in danger. It was all just a bit tame. Turns out Chuck washed up down here too, saving us once more in the way of a distraction. We get to a dead end with a locked door and broken ladder. There must be some way out. For once, this puzzle doesn't seem too obvious. I better examine the surrounding. Okay, there's a sign. Okay, I don't know what I expected. Let's try jumping up and see if we can grab onto the broken ladder. That sign was important after all. We have to rely on pure chance to find out this, as it's just covering a hidden passage. There's no way that we could have known that. The passage leads to a settlement of sorts, hidden in an old fallout shelter turned to morgue. They have lots of supplies and obviously felt hidden well enough away. Any group this sheltered will be on edge with newcomers, so as usual with Lee, I try a more diplomatic approach. The leader's reluctance to shoot us allows us to get close and take his gun. I kind of wish there was an option just to use that chance to shoot everyone, even if it was just an Easter egg, but no luck. Instead, we just disarm the gun and put it down, showing our peaceful intentions. To cut a long story short, these people are cancer survivors that were part of a support group. While they were in remission, Crawford's no liability policy meant they were not welcome. In fact, many were killed before the rest were able to go into hiding. Not only do they know how to get out of this sewer system, their leader is also a doctor and may be able to treat Omid. But realising we're not a threat is not the same as being willing to help us. Bree, the youngest and most vocal of the group, seems hardened against strangers. Invoking Clementine once again gets the empathy flowing. Their leader Vernon also is caring enough to risk his neck to make sure we get back to her. We have only a few minutes of exposure to this group and already they seem more established than the Save-Lot bandits ever did. Even the most quiet members stand out in the background, and although Bree is aggressively negative, she gives you a good idea of what this group has had to endure. While the more purely gameplay sections of this episode have been a bit lacking so far, especially in the sewer, the plot and the character and the establishment of this city and the options that you have with it have been quite strong, and it balances out the negatives. Well, that was easy. The game just skipped back to the house. We see Molly and she asks us about Vernon, but I'm more preoccupied on whether Clementine is okay. The game says that we avoided the question, and this wasn't my motivation at all. This tidbit caught me by surprise, though if I was thinking more logically, it would make sense to obfuscate Vernon's group from someone whose intentions aren't exactly crystal clear. We take Vernon to Omid, who looks over him while while we try to connect with Clementine, though she doesn't seem to be anywhere. Lee starts panicking, and I thought it was a bit weird at first. Normally Lee's reactions to a situation are based on our choices, or it kind of defaults to something broadly in line with how we feel. His trepidation here caught me by surprise, but it made me stop and think, why is he so panicked? Thinking it through for more than a second though, it becomes blindingly obvious. No time has passed since the last episode. Lee has just seen a young child die, followed by coming across a zombie of another. This would put anyone on edge, let alone someone who is responsible for a child of their own. And this isn't even mentioning the man stalking about who seems obsessed with Clementine. Even if we ignore all that, there's a weird dictatorship nearby that apparently kills children. As we try to find Clem, we come across everyone else. Kenny is drunk and Ben has no idea where she is either. The group is becoming less reliable just as the world seems to be becoming more dangerous. After a lot of worry, we find her in the shed outside, something we couldn't get over before. Inside it isn't only Clementine, but also a boat, and this ship seems to be in ship shape. Any chance of getting Kenny off that boat plan has gone out of the window. He gets to giving the boat a look over while the rest of us wait on the doctor and Omid. The status report is that Omid desperately needs some antibiotics and the boat desperately needs a new battery and some fuel. Molly, who stayed around with the intention of getting her ass on that boat, tells us that there's one place that has all of this: Crawford. Well, we won't be able to ask nicely. We could do a heist, steal what we need and get the hell out of there. This is evidently going to be the episode ending and I'm all for it. We know that this is the penultimate episode and a lot of loose ties will need to come together, but a dramatic bit of tomfoolery with the likelihood of at least one death, count me in. Vernon knows the sewers well and we have a route in. Molly obviously knows more about this place than she's letting on, though she seems on the level when it comes to her disdain of it. And Lee is the protagonist, and so there's no problem there. The only question is what to do with Clementine and Omid. Clementine is a young girl and will be a red flag even at a distance, and Omid is desperately ill and may die before we can help him. And remember, everyone turns. We can choose to leave Clem with Omid or bring her with us. Honestly, I think a smaller group may do better. We have Lee, Kenny, Molly and Vernon. That should be enough to identify what is needed, get in quickly and get out quicker. Maybe we could use some lookouts and people ready to help if anything goes wrong, but we don't get that choice. It's either we all go or no one does. That means no one tending to Omid, no one with Clem as I choose to leave her. I'm not happy about it, but I'm more frightened of people than walkers at this moment, though that stalker is about and I kind of forgot that. This is probably the decision I regretted the most after making it. Before we set out, Kenny gives us one final bit of information. There isn't space for everyone on that boat. We have about 10 prospective seafarers and only space for about 6 people. We may have to make some decisions on who can go aboard. That is if we choose to go with Kenny at all. But that is a discussion for later. As Kenny says, everyone might not make it. We evidently don't have any surprises on our way going through the sewers, as the next scene starts with us popping up through a manhole into Crawford. Also, Bree is with us as she knows the layout of the school Crawford is using as a hub. It's quiet, too quiet. Could it be a trap? Lee does his best Solid Snake impression, but the first guard we go to knock out turns out to be a zombie. The settlement has fallen and probably did so some time ago. Before we become the next victims of Crawford's downfall, we head into the school. Once inside, we go through what we need to get and where that is being stored based on the map of the area.
I'll make the run to the maintenance shed for the fuel.
It'll be faster if I go with you. I can take you right to it.
I'll come too. No, 2 people's enough. You stay here, see if you can use any of those tools we brought to get that armory door open. We might need to shoot our way out of here.
I'll go for the medicine.
I'll come with you. I know what to take.
Okay. Guess that leaves me to go find us a battery.
I'll go with you. Watch your back.
I was really hoping I'd get to choose who goes where and looks for what to have an impact on what goes down, but yeah, I'd be more annoyed with this if it didn't make sense. But the whole heist is a bit of a missed opportunity. With a game about decisions, it would have been amazing to plan out a robbery, choose who you might bring along and decide who's tasked with what. There is less agency than I was led to expect. The only retort to this is that the roles are given out to the obvious candidate, and our group is a bit too democratic to allow me to force Omid, Clem and Carly's corpse to retrieve the fuel. Sometimes games understandably suffer from protagonist syndrome, where one person, such as Lee, has to do everything regardless of common sense in order to empower the player. This has happened many times in The Walking Dead already. This is an example of the other side of the coin, taking the choice away from the player. Sometimes recreating the most realistic impact that we would have is a bit less fun. Lee partners with Molly and we go to get the battery, located in the auto shop next to the school. Before we we leave, getting chatting with Ben has him bring up his guilt about the motel incident and how that impacted on Kat and Duck. I understand he must be eating himself up, but telling Kenny is not sensible. In fact, it's quite selfish. Ben would be forcing Kenny to deal with more complications about his recently deceased family so he feels less guilty. Bottling emotions and guilt up isn't healthy, but neither is angering a man at the end of his tether, and there is a time and place and a way to go about it, and I tell him as such. Moving on, we learn more about Crawford from environmental storytelling and optional interactable bits and pieces. It definitely was a dictatorship, and Crawford built a Starling-esque cult of personality around himself, it seems. Out in the back alley next to the auto shop, a fence is sitting in our way, meaning that we have to use a shed to hop over the barbed wire. This brings us to a garage door that won't lift up. That was one of the few unpredictable jump scares this game gives. While The Walking Dead has horror themes, it focuses on drama over dread. That isn't to say that the horror isn't important and the game wouldn't be the same without it. Most of the horror, though, in the series comes from tension, atmosphere and character. This is a sensible choice as it works well within the genre, graphics and budget. The ambience of the game can delve deep into the uncertainty, cruelty, mirroring the drama of the plot. There is a handful of gore-based horror too, but it kind of relies on tension and player investment as the graphics aren't photorealistic and never pretend to be. Shock factor is one of the least utilised type of horror in The Walking Dead, but it does like to play up on the trope jump scares in order to add nervous energy to scenes. But very occasionally we do get something out of the blue, and its rarity makes it work all the more. Molly very clearly has a bit of history with this lad. We're able to get inside the auto shop with a car jack quickly via another basic QTE. There is a sign inside the shop that reads 1/4 of oil rations per Crawford citizen. Every 3 months, no exceptions, make it last.
More of Crawford's rules. How did anybody live like this? I'd rather take my chances on the outside.
Nearly every sign in the school relates to the brutal reality of those who lived in Crawford and its strict policies on age, health and its devotion to its fanatic leader. The sign is probably the only exception. Rationing oil is probably the least controversial and obvious thing to do when there is an apocalypse. The fact that he makes the comments when reading this sign compared to those that spit out minor eugenics is really bloody weird, and I don't think it was the original intention for this particular voice line. There is a battery in one of the cards, but only in the one raised by a hydraulic lift. Slicing the hydraulics gets the car down. Should have seen that coming. A more unique yet still quite underwhelming sequence occurs where we have to detach the car battery and climb up the fire engine with Molly before escaping upwards onto the roof. Have you ever lifted a car battery? Those things are ridiculously heavy. Now, I'm not saying you couldn't run with one, especially if your life depended on it, but jumping a good few meters with one is a bit of a harder task than the game makes out. Molly carries around the battery in a backpack like it's nothing, and her ability to act like Lara Croft in a game where the rest of the characters resemble lemmings in ability is very out of place, enough to make you question the reality of what she can do. We drop back down into the main school hallway, but Molly keeps hold of the battery as insurance while she goes to deal with things. What things? She doesn't say, but it probably isn't to do with her history in Crawford. I enjoy Molly as a character, even if she is a bit too competent compared to the rest of the world. Her reluctance to trust anyone and her murky past is consistent, and her being more contractual in her interactions with Lee is different than most people, adding some needed variety in character. But I hate how they play on this mystery of her past. It's so obvious that she used to live in Crawford or something adjacent that any reveal loses any impact. How can anyone, both within and outside the game, believe her obvious lies that she isn't from there? Her lying about her past isn't the problem though, but the way that The Walking Dead presents it as a mystery, yet at the same time making the truth blatantly obvious. They could make less fanfare about Molly's past, telling us that of course she knows Crawford, but she doesn't want to talk about her past, making her actions more about embellishing what little we know. Alternatively, they could keep that mystery, but make it much more intriguing. The devs portray Molly as the worst poker player on the planet with her incredibly conspicuous tells, and they also choose to have her characters explicitly point out her inconsistencies.
Right here, nurse's station. They were using it as a medical facility.
How do you know that?
Just makes sense, doesn't it?
It's as if the game wanted to create some intrigue to what's going on, but was too scared that the players wouldn't notice the clues and miss out. This ends with the gamers feeling untrusted, and this forgets that there is a joy in retrospectively noticing these hints. People may even replay the game to find them. Where was I? Oh yes, being dropped off at the school by Molly. I guess we'll just have to trust her word that she'll be back. As we head back to the meeting point, Bree and Kenny zoom past trying to barricade the double doors. We help them with another button masher and bar the door with our hand axe. I don't like the fact that we're all all just okay leaving that door, but I guess out of sight, out of mind, and let's hope that they get distracted if we leave them. Despite whatever issues they come across, they managed to get enough fuel and they escaped unscathed. Vernon and Krista have not been as successful and haven't been accounted for. We go to check in, waving to the zombies at the double doors as we go past. They aren't the only ones knocking at a door though. There's a big group convalescing outside the nurse's office where the pair were looking for antibiotics. I'd love them to improve on these shooting mechanics, but they're more than serviceable, and I think that the limited focus on this gives us more focus on what actually works, and it's still nice as a change of pace. Once finished with the zombies, we get into the nurse's office and find out the pair haven't been able to get into the medicine cabinet, and that's an oddly reoccurring theme in this series actually, isn't it? As usual, Lee is the only one able to solve riddles, and we get to investigating ourselves. Fiddling about, we watch a video player that was used to record consultations. Anna, the patient in the recording, is being told that she is pregnant and that she must have it terminated, as are the rules of Crawford. This is obviously a horrible experience for her, though the doctor does seem a bit empathetic, allowing her to return tomorrow, giving her time to process everything. This scene at first may not seem to be as hard-hitting as we were expecting. I think that given all the cruelty of Crawford, this scene is kind of mellowed by the doctor being calm and somewhat comforting. However, this softly highlights that there is a greater evil that lays dormant in Crawford. Here there's an acceptance of evil. It's something that must occur, something normal, just part of the system. A chilling reminder of what can happen if we learn to accept little evils. I do believe that this was the intention behind this, and to why they chose the focal character, the doctor, to be a complicit cog in an evil machine, rather than the one who's making the decisions. This may be fascinating stuff, but it doesn't get us closer to opening that medicine cabinet, though the video does give us some idea where to go next. The doctor is about to type the passcode into the cabinet, but he pulls away, teasing us with his flirting digits as he hovers over our coveted button. If we found another tape, we may be in luck. A good place to start looking would be on that doctor's person, and as it goes, we saw his corpse fly from the roof and get battered by Molly earlier. There's another mystery being floated around that I have hinted at before. What is going on with Krista? She has quite a reaction to what has just happened on that tape. You may have already guessed what is going on, but The Walking Dead hasn't been as overt with her backstory. That's probably because we've had a bit more time with Krista, that things can unfold that little bit slower. When playing the game and involving yourself with her at all opportunities, it is somewhat simple question to answer to what is going on with her. However, I do like how it plays out in the background. That is until Lee basically tells you what is going on. I think that most people would know now what's going on and why Krista has been so quick to jump down your throat and has been very protective of Clem. This attitude is much more understandable now, and everything that this game got wrong with Molly, they got right with Krista. Going back down to the alley, we get another quick jump scare that is easily handled with a QTE, and then we jump over the fence again to the doc's body. He's the one on the video and has a passcode on him and a videotape. This does lead to a familiar frustration bearing its head. Lee has given us a hint to what this note refers to. This is optional content, and it doesn't take a genius to work out it's for a locker, which makes it even more infuriating to the way that it spells it out for you.
Looks like some kind of code, but Vernon said the safe combination was only 4 numbers.
I know each episode is self-sufficient to a degree, but most people will likely have around at least 10 hours of gameplay at this time, yet we're still infantilized by the hints we receive. This one comes directly from Lee, and so there's no way to opt out of this clue, UI or not. There is a cut after receiving the videotape to Lee entering the school hallway again. However, we don't know how he managed this. There was a fence in the way, and the door he used was a one-way emergency exit. You can make up solutions to how he managed to do this, but this was clearly an oversight, as he couldn't have come through the main doorway without meeting a fair few undead mates on the way. We use the locker code on the only locker that is interactable, and we don't even need to put that code in manually. We receive a third tape for our effort and go forward to watch both of them. The second tape has Anna returning to the doctor, him getting out some medicine to use in the termination, but before he can do that, he gets stabbed by Anna. This was likely the downfall of Crawford and its dictatorship, which was only being followed due to its effective zombie management. In that video, we did see the doctor put in a passcode, and we used that information to put in what looks like a different passcode, unlocking the medical supplies. We can then choose to watch the third tape on our own for no other reason than curiosity. I do so, and we see the doc again, but this time with Molly. Starting with zipping up his trousers lets you know that this guy was willing to go against the grain only if it suited him, and if it was unlikely to get him in trouble. He's definitely an asshole that used his position for blowjobs. You can see why Molly hated him, and considering we haven't met her sister, it's most likely that this doctor had her condemned to death with his inaction. This ties Molly's past up in a nice little bow, explaining her actions and attitudes towards Crawford and strangers. And just because the mystery angle was presented badly, this doesn't make her actual story any less engaging. We have all that we need now, so it's time to reconvene and end this successful heist turned looting. Molly reappears as we make our way back and we ask her about her history. She explains that she went to go get a pic of her late sister. Her history with Crawford was one of convenience at the time as they were alone, but soon they saw the place for what it was. We could push further, but it's by the by. Ben meets us in the hallway, explaining that he was looking for something to help bust into the armory. Ben is a tit and a half, and he's just released a horde of zombies into our path, and now everyone is stuck inside the classroom. Bree locks the door while the rest of us tried to get into the armory. Ben, feeling inadequate again, has another build-up of guilt, and this time we can't contain him.
It was me who made the deal with the bandits at the motor inn, slipping them supplies. I thought maybe I could keep them off our backs. When it got discovered, that's when they attacked. And that's when Duck...
We're through to the armory, but due to the commotion caused by this outburst, we don't take advantage of it. Kenny shouts at Ben that he ain't getting a space on the boat, but I think this should be put to a vote. But when I say that, I didn't think for a second that this vote would happen now. I argue for Ben to stay when pressed, just wishing that we'd hurry up and get the hell out of there, but Bree bears a brunt of our faffing about. That shakes everyone else into leaving, and we get the most original and enjoyable action set piece of this episode, and maybe the whole series so far, at least in terms of pure gameplay. We're running up and out the school bell tower, armed with a shotgun as walkers are filling in from all the entrances. Why did they store their armory in a place with the most accesses? I don't know. The scene's geometry makes the area seem more dense than our other encounters as we catch glimpses of the others fighting throughout. As is Lee's prerogative, we managed to fall down a couple of times, having our legs stuck in broken floorboards. This requires us to go from purely headshotting approaching walkers to shifting our leg free. The balance isn't hard to get right, but I did get greedy on my first attempt and failed to shoot a zombie in time, making me restart this sequence. Lee shifts to his hand axe and goes through the walkers above him, making it to the top. The veracity of this whole section does make up for the lackluster action of this episode somewhat, and at least you're being left on the best this episode has to offer. At the top of the tower, the group starts to make it through onto the rooftop, with Lee, Ben and Kenny last in the queue. The bell rings once more right next to Ben. Why is it going off? Because it seems that the fierce leader of Crawford was strung up on it, his zombified corpse swinging as it tries to claim new victims, the next being Ben. We grab onto him and we begin to pull him up from where he's fallen.
Come on, you can do it!
There's no time! You have to go! Now!
A big decision to end this episode. Do we let Ben drop? Pros: he's useless. He's even somewhat of a liability. It's one less person to argue over the boat. He provides a distraction for our escape. He said he wants to die. It ends the feud with Kenny. Cons: he's a well-meaning person needlessly dying. Everything isn't as much as his fault as he makes out. It's kind of murder, letting him die, and he is only a child. For me, he doesn't deserve to be condemned for his idiocy, and while he needs to be better, he is only young, and younger than his height makes out. I pull him up, Lee showing off some proper upper body strength. Kenny may not agree with this, but again, I can forgive him for not sharing sympathy with someone who said he was the cause of his family's death not 2 seconds ago. Apparently, the journey back to the safe house was easier than I assumed, as we're instantly back there again. We see a dead walker in the hallway and think the worst, but soon reunited with Clementine, who managed to kill it. She's fine, but Omid has been in and out of consciousness. Before Vernon leaves for his own lot, he offers to take Clementine from us. He's been a dad before, he has supplies, and he says he's better suited for her survival. He may not be wrong, and if there are limited space aboard that boat, this may be a blessing in disguise. I decide to mull it over, not giving a response as yet. Molly also decides that this isn't the right fit for her and goes back to attacking Savannah solo, doing a poochie and returning to her home planet. We finally connect with Clementine again, and she laments that we aren't looking for her parents. I did say that we would try this in the last episode, my bad, but we haven't had a chance, and we still have hints that the horde of zombies that followed us on the train is still on our heels. I choose to be honest. We both fall asleep, disheartened by all that has happened. When we awake, we are alone. Clementine's not there. The rest of the group must be somewhere as well, but as we venture out into the garden to look for them, we only see her iconic hat. Something is wrong. In the alley, we see her radio next to some debris, and we hesitantly approach. do we show the bite? Instinctively, I always choose to show the bite. I've never really thought about why Lee would hide this information before. It always felt self-evident that the best thing was to tell everyone. These people have helped him for the most part, and they may need to carry on our quest to save Clem without us. However, for this video, I'll play devil's advocate. It isn't as straightforward as I originally thought. If we think that we are going to die, then our main goal is not our safety anymore, but Clementine's. Showing the bite may interrupt things and slow that down, especially if we think that this group will just end us right away, a la Larry. I don't think that they would. Their characters don't seem to be that way inclined, and meta-thinking, there's one more episode to go, but the outcome of this decision is not as important as the impact of having this decision. The character you have been playing for a significant while, that you've roleplayed as, invested in, and watched develop through your own input, has been bitten. He has a death sentence as far as we know, and that is a hell of a cliffhanger to end your penultimate episode on. The group acknowledges us and are grateful that we were honest. We asked them to help us find Clementine, as we need them to carry on if we can't. We don't know where she is, but believe that she could be with Vernon after hearing him mentioning taking her yesterday. We get a blow-by-blow account from everyone as they spell out whether or not they will help us or not. Let's shelf Kenny for a moment. The idea that our previous interactions, decisions and actions have built up over time and shaped the way that others see us is reinforced strongly here. It's essentially giving you a direct link to the whole game's premise. Choice and consequence, not just obvious this or thatting, a measuring stick to how you have been consistently through your whole playthrough. An incredible idea to leave you with as this episode comes to a close, though Kenny undermines it for me. His character may be hot-headed, aggressive and obtuse, but he had values, and when they have been shifted, they felt inorganic. Being angry at someone and disagreeing with them is not the same as not supporting them, especially when it matters. He's the only character that has been there since episode 1, and therefore you want his relationship to be the most realistic of all, but instead you're left feeling that the calculation of his relationship is skewed unrealistically, again bringing us out of this experience. This is made much worse as you think he'd care for Clementine as well, and he even says as such. Kenny is a great character, but just gets let down when he reacts to our input. The character falls away and instead we get a contrived reaction to the mechanics. I might be being too kind to the character, maybe he's just a massive dick, but I think that he has much more colour to his character than the mechanics represent. After that atomic ending, you'd think that the game would end. It's an interesting cliffhanger and there are some major plot beats set up for the grand finale, but no, we actually get to see Lee making it to Vernon's hideout.
Are you all right? Where are you? Vernon, you son of a bitch!
Hello, Lee?
Where have you taken her?
This isn't Vernon, and you should really watch your tone. Clementine's fine, but if I were you, I'd choose my next words very carefully.
That wasn't needed. The walkie-talkie guy does give off an air of unease, and to know that he has Clementine is a neat setup for the finale. But why go through the trouble of creating a red herring in Vernon just to tell us the truth a second later? The truth to where Clementine would have been an interesting thing to dissect while waiting for the next episode. If you planned on just telling us where she was, why didn't you do that in the alleyway scene to not diminish its impact? I'm so bewildered by this decision, as it seems so obvious that this was one scene too many. You aren't J.R.R. Tolkien, and you can't get away with dragging your heels on dramatic endings. Before the players' decision percentages, we're given a different breakdown to who came with Lee to the morgue and who went with other players. A good few John Stuart Mill fans got everyone to come with them, though Maud had just Kenny. The third most popular option was mine, with everyone but Kenny. Maybe, as the percentages suggest, it's easier to get Kenny to come along than I thought, though I have a suspicion that this includes a lot of people playing the game perfectly, acting with the game's choices that they know will lead to the best outcomes in terms of plot and relationships. And the second most popular group has Kenny on his own. I can imagine most trying to just ingratiate themselves with him couldn't manage to get everyone else on side. As for the key decisions, I stand by my choice to kill the boy in the attic, and I'm a bit surprised that the big majority didn't, though I think I was right about the bite as shown here. Episode 4 is no episode 3, and that isn't me being pedantic, it's just saying that it's a much weaker episode. The idea of Crawford and its inhabitants aren't without merit, and the heist was a good bit of fun on the whole, whole. However, it wasn't as rich in character and kind of moved us away from the real tension of the overarching plot, leaving that for the last chapter instead. Though they did do a good job of weaving in the impact of the past episodes into this story while not dwelling slowly on them. Action and mechanics were the things that kind of really let things down, though they did get slowly better as the episode went on, but they both started so poorly in both presentation and execution, kind of relying on the clock tower scene at the end to make up for this, that it kind of did, but not as much as it needed to. I think the thing that bothers me about this episode is that it epitomizes something that all the episodes have struggled with, and that is the intrigue, and by extension the puzzles are just too obvious. I've complained enough already about them, but I think the problem's prevalence is because so many things are being sewn up for the final episode, because the final episode wants to focus on Clem, Lee and that radio over anything else, and rightly so, but this does mean that the plot lines and questions are needing to be solved before that episode. So we get a lot of time dedicated to solving and revealing character motivations and such, and The Walking Dead just hasn't done that well with that in the whole series. The characters are good, but when they've tried to present a mystery about them, they kind of let it down. The writers and developers seem too scared to let you miss anything and so give you all the answers. For a game that so elegantly walks with its deep, rich and mature characters, it seems scared to trusting them to keep you enthralled. It is important to say that while this is a real problem, I don't want to overstate its impact. While it's frustrating and definitely takes the rug from your feet, the plot on the whole still has me hooked. The characters still have me rooted to the keyboard, and I'm desperate to find Clementine and reunite her with Lee, if maybe just for a last time.
I got you. You can lean on me if you have to.
I'm okay. I'm okay.
There isn't a second lost between the two episodes. We are right back where we left off. That is, in the morgue, bitten, angry, and with no clue how to get to Clementine. She's out there with the psycho, and we are trapped with the swarm of zombies enveloping the area. They have followed us from Macon and provide this maniac with a figurative sea of danger before we can save her, and Krista seems very determined to do so. We need to save ourselves and get out of this place. The main entrance is of no use, but a lift shaft, if opened, would provide us a way up to safety. Despite the bite, we are tasked with figuring a way to open this door open. Normally you can talk with everyone and explore in these puzzle sections.
We'll have time to chit-chat later.
Fair enough, I should have expected that. The use of a rib separator seems to do the job on the door, but Lee collapses before we can get through. Most people will know from other zombie media, including the Walking Dead projects, that bites are a death sentence. You will turn. But the rate of change can vary widely, even within one world. It's anybody's guess to how quickly we will turn. What isn't up for discussion is whether we will or we won't. Or is it? Removing infected limbs has been a way to survive infections for centuries, and even within The Walking Dead, we can choose for Lee to go through with the chopping off of his arm in order to perhaps save himself. While I feel that this may be a long shot, any chance is better than no chance, and even if it just slows the infections, that is something. On the other hand, if you pardon the pun, we might be in a weaker position and less likely to be able to help the group save Clementine. You could say that leaving your arm is a sacrifice to save Clementine, but as much as I adore Clementine, she is part of a duo, and I want Lee to have every chance he can get to make it to her alive. This is going to hurt. Well, yeah, the EOI is pointing out the obvious again. Anyway, warning for graphics.
You got...
Try to stay still! Fuck! Gotta tighten the tourniquet. I'm sorry.
Watching this weirdly made me a bit edgy. I don't know why, as it's not exactly realistic in visuals, but I think the actors sold it well enough, and I'm well and truly inside the mind of Lee now. We make it. Well, I guess it would be cruel, yet kind of sadistically funny if we were just to end the game there with our death. We go up the lift shaft ladder, struggling with every rung, but making it to the hospital roof. Seeing that we're indeed surrounded by lots of walkers below, there seems to be an emergency exit down, but it's very crowded. You and the team decide to use the old bell trick to lure the zombies towards the opposite side of the hospital, then sneak back the other way. This seems a bit stupid to me, as there's so many zombies in this city that presumably the exit will still be surrounded by zombies even if they go towards one side more. But apparently this will work, and so I go around to find a way of getting to the bell tower. I try to talk to everyone and get a weird glitch as I do so. I think I switched who I was talking to mid-scene and it just was resetting back to my position, but it was just a bit weird. Either way, we end up using a ladder to climb to the nearby bell tower tower. Why is the one-handed man doing this? The argument is, and it's used throughout this episode, that Lee is a dead man walking, and so he's much more expendable. It makes enough sense as a reason to get the player to do everything, I guess, but you do question the logic as he stumbles over and drops the ladder. You ring the bell but have to jump back. I like how no one helped Lee. It's as if they used this one animation regardless of whether there were people there to help him or not. All's well that ends well, and the group runs back to the house using the bell as a distraction. Molly, wherever she is, would be proud. As is common, we get back to the house immediately, facing no on-screen issues. When we get there, however, the shed seems to be locked from the outside, a shovel barring the doors. What is inside there? What horrors could possibly emerge from the deadly shed? Kenny? He looks a bit worse for wear as he is ambushed by Vernon and the cancer survivors, stealing the boat as they left. I didn't think that they were capable of this. What horrors was Bree holding back? He's annoyed, and after relaying the story of the missing hand, everyone discusses what the new plan will be after rescuing Clementine. Kenny's anger gets the better of him, and again it's directed to Ben.
Fuck you, Kenny! I am so sorry about Katja and Duck. I am! And I know I fucked up. But stop pushing me around and stop wishing I was dead. No! You know how they died. You've said goodbye. I never got to see my family, my parents, my little sister. Do you get that? Your family is gone, but at least you had them to lose. I never made it home. They could be alive or dead or walkers or worse, and I don't know. So give me a fucking break.
I really love this. It humanises Ben and explains his frustration and anger. However, I say that Kenny only turned on him when he said that he caused his family to die, but he needed to blow up at some point, stand his ground and explain himself. If he did this to begin with, to Lily or straight after she left, I think people would have understood, and his mistakes, caused from panicking and trying too hard, wouldn't have happened. The past is the past, and now everything is in the open and we can move forward, hopefully for the better. Anyway, we're going to go into Mass Effect 2 mode and start giving orders to everyone on how we're going to hold out this house until the dead get distracted. Ben being useless and Lee on the floor, everything seems to be coming full circle. The place doesn't stay safe for long as zombies including young Bree spill into the hall. We split her open and run upstairs. We are holding tight and we have little ammo left. I don't know how we'll survive. Well, actually, it's quite obvious it's going to be to the attic above us. However, I didn't act on that assumption as we have a chance to kill some zombies in first person mode. I probably should have held on for a bit longer and used my ammo more sparingly, but I got carried away. We're up in the attic, the place where that young boy starved to death in order to avoid the walkers. We will find ourselves in a similar state if we can't get out, but there's no safe way out of the house as it's teeming with zombies. Shooting our guns has only made it worse. We are reminded of Clem's situation and the need we have for speed. The last time we were stuck in a confined space with Kenny and a person likely to be zombified was at the St. John's, and that ended with a splattered head. Kenny already wants to discuss the reality of us turning. I get it and stay silent. I think anything I could say could easily be used against me. Things come to a head and we can use a head to bash his skull in. I don't want to do that though, as Kenny may be someone we need to have about to save Clem. He grabs the bus instead and throws it away in frustration. He does love us after all. The bus smashes into the wall, leaving a hole that leads to the adjoining house's attic, a potential way out. There's a bit of downtime while people cycle in and out of expanding the hole for us to fit through. I tell Omid and Krista I want them to take care of Clem if things go Pete-tong. Kenny is too volatile. Krista tells us to stop talking like we're dead. Positivity is key. On the other side of the wall is a couple of dead bodies, those who ended it all before it truly began.
Good. No, Lee. She left me. A son. People that cared about us. I forgive her, but it don't make it any less wrong. You don't just end it because it's hard. You stick it out, and you help the folks you care about.
I never saw this coming, and it's one of the main reasons I think that Kenny's my favourite character in this series. His determination to the extent of possibly endangering everyone is deep-rooted into his need to fight and keep going. I don't necessarily agree with him, but his emotional torment doesn't just stem from Duck, but from being left by Kat, something that I hadn't even thought about. He definitely isn't a hero, and I won't paint him as one, but he's very much a human, and in a world of zombies, that is something. Sticking to the rooftops is necessary. Ground level isn't safe anymore. We can't match this number of undead bodies, and we need to avoid them. Just one dodgy balcony to go. Ben, why did you have to become so relatable just before impaling yourself? Side note, if there really is a zombie apocalypse, I think that's how I would end up, dying by scenery or freak accident. He isn't dead yet, but checking on him with Kenny makes it quite obvious that he will probably be soon. We only have a couple of bullets, we give the gun to Kenny, his treatment to Ben weighing on him. You think he'd put Ben out of his misery, but no. Kenny is intent on staying by Ben's side, and we have no say in the matter. A flood of zombies wash over the pair and we see nothing and hear only the echo of bullets. It's just Lee and Omid and Krista now. Kenny and Ben, after hitting us with as much as possible as their character arcs intertwined, have exited stage right and we won't see them again. Kenny's decision here is a bit odd, somewhat going against what he said earlier. It still does actually feel weirdly right though. Him and Ben bowing out together is definitely fitting, and his own guilt and instability makes it not as jarring as you might expect. Krista and Omid's reaction to this is all a bit weird, as they act like they couldn't see what was going on when they could have easily looked over the ledge. I think the way this scene was written and envisioned was in a much different space than the practicalities of development allowed, probably confined to a smaller area. I can't say this for certain, but it would make sense that these odd questions are being asked. The world keeps turning though, and we need to carry on our search, crossing the building tops towards the hotel we think is holding Clementine. We can see Lee, who's looking grey compared to the other two.
Omid and I have to stay safe. For her.
They aren't wrong, are they? There is no point in rescuing a child to leave her alone in this horrible world. When it comes to risk-taking, like this ominous sign turned bridge, we are the ones that choose to cross it. Quite predictably, it breaks apart and we are separated from the other two remaining members of the group. It's dark, the zombies are swelling the streets, and we have only a butcher knife to protect ourselves. We know that death is all around us, and these undead models are only centimetres apart. If you excuse the knife-based pun, we do get a proper butcher's at them, and you can see that there are some unfamiliar faces. Throughout these 5 episodes, we have a fair few repeating zombie models. As much as this can be a bit immersion breaking, it isn't the worst way a studio can cut development time and refocus their time and budget elsewhere. The Walking Dead is not hurt too much by this lack of graphical variety, as weirdly the zombies aren't actually that important, and the biggest set pieces involve characters at the forefront, not them. The undead models can mesh into the background, especially if we are acutely focused on what's happening at the forefront. The cinematic use of camera angles also hides this well. Knowing that this didn't have the biggest team or budget does give The Walking Dead some freedom from criticism in this regard, as if corners do have to be cut, they have to be cut in ways that are least noticeable for the most part. There is some minor plot hand-waving too. We know that the Horde has followed Lee from Macon, so the zombies in the same school uniform as Ben are accounted for example. This scene, however, has the zombies at the forefront. They need to seem overwhelming and in Lee's face, and here we see new models and textures for some of the undead in the forefront, adding some needed dynamism and interest in this emotion-laden scene. The unique models were finalists of a pre-order competition, and this was their prize. The winner had their image immortalised as Spree. Not a bad place to use them. As Lee smashes his way through as many zombies that dare to come at him, he gets more and more splattered with gore. More and more come to their end at Lee's singular hand, but not all are paying attention to him. It isn't explained at this point why he's able to avoid what surely would be a death sentence to everyone else. We've seen characters die from being overwhelmed by a lot less. I think it must be something to do with him becoming one of them, and only those nearby can sense any sort of life within him. We see a car outside the Marsh House, the hotel in which Clem and our captor are inside. It may be memorable to some. Inside the Marsh House, we end up outside the correct room. I don't remember a room being said, but maybe I missed that, or maybe stalking through the empty rooms has been cut from the story. Either way, we find ourselves in an evidently used room. A rope is tied between 2 doors, probably to alert the captor if Clem tries to get out. We look about, but we can't see anything of note, and as we get closer to the rope, before we sit with this madman, who kind of reminds me of Steve Buscemi, I lie about having a knife. For those who may have forgotten, at the end of episode 2 we came across a car with supplies. Clem thought it might belong to someone. Well, it did. This guy. Lee is trapped, and this guy gives us his evil origin story.
My son Adam went missing. I took him out hunting even though my wife said he was too young. I figured he had to learn. I came back without him, and the look on her face said, "You are a monster."
The motivation for the stranger, as the game chooses to refer to him as, is that just after he lost his son, his car full of supplies got stolen by our group. After following the group and eventually talking to Clementine via radio, he has come to see Lee as the worst human being imaginable, and the stranger thinks that he should be in charge of Clem after he has punished us for our deeds. Annoyingly, we don't have the option to point out the obvious to this man, that why does he think that he would be good at looking after Clem when he failed to look after his own children? But what is the most disappointing is that the stranger is the main antagonist of The Walking Dead Series 1. It seems I'm creating a thing of reviewing games with undeveloped big bads, but I can't help thinking that the stranger is just that, too much of a stranger. There are a couple of strengths to him, the most evident being that the voice actor is very skilled and makes the best of limited screen time. I also understand that he is supposed to be detached, as he is less of a character really, and more of a narrative tool to examine how you played the game. I don't think this is compelling enough though. Your decisions have constantly been questioned as you go through the story, and in much more natural and intriguing ways. The stranger doesn't need to be here purely for that reason, instead should be here for himself. There has been a build up to the identity of who has Clementine. We have known that there's been a man behind the radio for a long time. How he embedded into the story has been a fundamental driving question of the last 2 episodes. For it to be answered as he owned a car our groups looted is a bit rubbish. Remember, we weren't sure if the owners were alive, and in this run, we chose to leave it anyway. If the man was a total stranger watching us, judging us, and had taken Clem right at the end, that would have been better than half inserting him into the story, but pretending there's much more to it. There might be potential reasons why this character might be a bit lacking, and this stems from some plot changes that occurred during the development of The Walking Dead, most specifically episode 2. I briefly mentioned the development changes to episode 2, that originally the whole Macon area was planned to be more available to Lee, and we would have had more first-hand interactions with the Save Lot bandits. It's also supposed that the stranger's car was a last-minute addition. If this is true, and I'm not 100%, but I think it is, it would point to a different character taking on that stranger's role, Jolene, the lady who stole Clem's hat after suffering from the Save Lot crew. There are a lot of similarities between Jolene and the stranger, most notably that they were watching us from afar and were obsessed with Clementine. She's certainly treated as an important character in episode 2 despite her small appearance. She even gets the big reveal at the end of that chapter. If the whole bandit plotline was given more space and we learnt more about Jolene, then her capturing and questioning us would have been more earned as an antagonist, a sympathetic one at that. Obviously this is just speculation on my part, and actually the benefits of cutting her plot significance and thus narrowing the scope of the game were ultimately justified. It allowed the focus to be on the core group and shifted that pace in that pivotal middle episode. Overall, the stranger just isn't as interesting as she would have been, but I think it's probably a better trade-off, because my point about the stranger being a lackluster character is valid, but his presence does once again reinforce the main choices mechanic of The Walking Dead. He questions you on all that you have done. His character may not have any ethical right to do so, but as I said, the stranger isn't purely a character, but a way to revisit and challenge the decisions you've made so far. Revisiting these moments and relating the presents to the past does a decent job of connecting the two and showing a cause and effect. I only wish that the stranger would push more and go further with interrogation of Lee, really pushing this point. But at the end of the day, there is no way that Clem is staying with this man. Neither Lee or myself would let that happen. We get a chance to do something when Clem gets loose. The stranger's alert system being flawed means she sneaks up unnoticed, and Lee can eyeball a suggestion to hit this prick. Clem doesn't smash this bottle, but gives the stranger blunt force trauma with it instead. By paying attention, we can click on the gun he's holding to push it away. What follows is a mixture of scene interactions and basic QTEs, pressing Q and then E. The mixture of the two again does mean that you can't just sit back, as you have to suddenly react to something more pointedly in the scene, but overall this is still underwhelming. Lee struggles to get an upper hand on this man, and his weakening body ends up with him being strangled. However, Clementine ends it before it comes to this, shooting the stranger dead, saving our life by ending his. Reunited, we try to calm her down, forgetting that she hasn't seen us since we became very right-handed. She is understandably scared, but we don't have long to get her to safety, and there isn't so much time for talking. Side note, we can confirm that the stranger did have his wife's zombified head in the bag. A title of this section is a reference reference to the film Seven owing to this. And I really actually hate this, as I don't think it adds anything to his character. Honestly, just makes him seem a bit more gimmicky rather than having any interesting character trait. We're about to leave the hotel and we learn that the zombies identify each other via their smell. By smelling like them, we can carefully wade through them until we're in the clear. This is something that Rick and Glenn do early in the comics and the TV show too. And so it's not just some odd new idea and actually ties the game to its roots. This is why I love these two. Clementine can be upset but will force herself to do what needs to be done, and Lee will go through hell to save this girl, as she is not only reliant on him, but she is his redemption, and his love for her is proof that he isn't a monster. Not yet anyway. It's very dark and there's no less walkers outside the hotel, and we must walk amongst them. Stalking slowly between them is the last thing you want to do, but it's the only thing that you can do to stay alive. This could be the hardest thing that either of them will ever do, and it's made even harder when Clem sees her mum and dad. You'd be forgiven for forgetting that Clem's main motivation was her parents. She had waited to find them for so long and was manipulated by that stranger with it. Finding your parents dead is enough to break anyone, let alone a young girl. She has been able to push through everything and she'll need all the support she can have now, though that isn't possible as Lee collapses. We aren't dead. We see Clementine above us. Somehow she dragged us both to safety, but it's too late for us. Clem has very dramatic facial language, but that doesn't mitigate the emotional turmoil she is going through, that I'm going through. Clem, in her infinite strength, helps Lee get forward, but there isn't much further he can go. Falling over, we get a QTE, the usual repeatedly press Q one, but this isn't just to stand up, and even then we can't manage it. As much as this mechanic has been overused and annoying and boring, it powerfully shows the difficulty here and the inevitability of the situation. This is followed by Lee not being able to walk around like he normally would do, interact with items and solve a puzzle. He has only the power to look around and help Clem solve it for herself. We are quite literally handing over the responsibility of survival from Lee to Clem without even telling you anything in the story, just by purely the mechanic. It is actually wonderful. A bit of luck and Lee mustering his last bit of strength to pass her a loose baseball bat allows Clem to finish off the zombie. And now she can leave, but Lee, we, aren't coming with her.
There's only one thing you can do. You know that.
The Walking Dead Season 1 gives us one last decision. Do we ask Clementine to shoot us?
You have to shoot me, honey.
Lee, no.
The first time I played The Walking Dead, I had worked out Lee was doomed, that despite my efforts he'd die. I still didn't expect this decision. It concludes Lee's story perfectly as he tries to prepare Clementine for the future. He has one last bit of agency in the hardest of decisions. As for my choice, well, I've changed my opinion on this many times, and this retrospective is about judging the decisions that are given to the players, not the answers that I provided, but I've explained my reasons in order to underpin my player's perspective. I do what I think is right, and I ask Clem to shoot me. I want her fully prepared for a world so unforgivably cruel.
I'll miss you.
Me too.
It's hard to judge episode 5 in of itself, as its ending is one of the most upsettingly beautiful I've ever played through. The climax of Lee's journey is one that is outstandingly told, and it's hard to go back through the rest of the episode without the sound of that gunshot ringing out, but I will try to do so as much as possible. Firstly, this is the shortest episode with the least amount of scenes and with few moments where you get to talk and reconnect with characters. Though this is probably the right way to go, as I think too much is happening that you don't want to slow down the pace to any extraordinary levels. Many characters have had their stories come to a close here. Lee's obviously. The other big player was Kenny. Lee met him in the second explorable area, meeting him just after Clem at Herschel's farm. I've extensively gone through his history, both the great narrative swings and the frustrating ways he reacts to you, but this final episode backtracks slightly on his awkward misplaced anger and instead, like episode 3, nailed his volatile temper and the pain that is behind it. Him staying with Ben as he died was a weird choice, but his desire to make things right and his disregard regard for his life doesn't necessarily go against his disdain of others ending their lives on purpose. Ben having his death tied to Kenny works thematically, and I was glad I kept him around to fully appreciate his personality. His awkward slight dorkiness made him quite useless as a survivor, and his age, ineptitude and worries never meant you fully trusted him having your back, but some people were like that, and the scene of him expressing everything he was holding back, his naiveness, his lingering sadness for his family he never got to say goodbye to, was perfect and rounded him as a character. Apart from Clem, the only other characters that may be alive would be Omid and Krista. Krista has some volatility to her as well, and is quite judgmental at first, but softens over time, and this behaviour becomes more understandable when we learn about her pregnancy. I do think they suffer from being introduced quite late in the series. Most characters had a bit more time to mature both on screen and off it. As for judging this episode's gameplay, there's hardly much to discuss. There's a bit of a quick puzzle or two towards the beginning, a shooting segment that doesn't force you to use your ammo, and the rest of it mainly comes down to generic QTEs, but even they were less forthcoming. What I will say though is that final scene with the QTEs that you can't actually achieve, even though they're just for standing up, the way that you hand over the responsibility of solving the puzzle by just looking around because you can't move around and interact with things the same way you used to, that is perfect mechanical storytelling. But as I say, they were less forthcoming on the whole, and this is partly due to the last episode being shorter and swifter. The final episode tends to go from one interactable set piece to the next, and you aren't in control as the pace as much as usual. To put it bluntly, the ending wanted to be about the story, and again, that's the right call. I've repeatedly called this the strongest element of the game, and while I've certain issues with the antagonist, but the story was never set up to be a clash of wheels, but a story of survival and paternity, and as the final scene shows, they did that beautifully. Even after this final episode, we get to go through the decisions that we made and compare them to fellow gamers. It seems like people were more in tune with one another in this final episode, with only one option being split down the middle. I didn't realise I could kill the stranger, but it turns out I let Clem down. I needed to use her to shoot him for me. I must not have been pressing Q quickly enough. I kind of like the fact that I messed up and I didn't even realise that in the moment. It makes the QTE sequences much more thoughtful in retrospect. Going back through this, what else could I have failed at? I don't know. I'm also surprised that so many agreed on Lee's ultimate fate, that a near absolute majority had Clem shoot him in that iconic scene. As you can tell by my ultimate decision, I erred in this favour, but for me it was a closer run thing than I thought these decisions show. Before the credits roll, we get another set of story results. This shows us the result of everyone we met and influenced over the whole 5 episodes. Did they survive? What happened along the way? And did anything specific happen to them? Due to this being a very condensed recap, there's only a bit of information on each character, but once again, for the final time, we are shown what our gameplay and our choices did. You can get nostalgic over friends and enemies and easily wonder what could have been different if you acted differently. But as that's what the game is all about, let's have a look into these decisions, eh?
You're gonna have to depend on the honesty of strangers if you're gonna make it. And if those same people get to questioning yours, you're gonna be in trouble.
Well, the good thing about video games is that you can actually check what you did differently. The Walking Dead Season 1 has a very impactful story with a well-crafted world inhabited with grounded people, all shaped by our choices. But that one major criticism of The Walking Dead and of Telltale games going forward is that this is an illusion. The game may tell you that you've made a significant impact, and they successfully stress this point often. However, this could just be a case of the developers fooling you into believing as such, with hardly anything changing at all. Do you actually make a difference, or is this just an illusion? I've avoided going into this question until now, as I thought it would confuse evaluating the narrative if I tried to examine every possible world at once, but now this is worth getting into the nitty-gritty of what our choices actually do. The first thing that Telltale does in The Walking Dead Season 1 is state that this game series adapts to the choices you make. The story is tailored by how you play. I went on about this significantly early on, but is this true? To answer this, let's first look at the first proper decision we get, whether we should wait until night when leaving Clementine's house or to leave straight away. We chose to leave straight away and met Sean and Chet, helping them get to Herschel's farm. What happens if we wait instead? Instead, we end up bumping into a policeman who orders them both to freeze, thinking them to be killers. It turns out the officer is helping Sean look for the person who had killed his friend Chet. You can help them in exchange for a lift, finding Chet undead. After this, you escape the city with the officer and Sean, staying at Herschel's farm with the boy as if you did if you went earlier. The question is, what's changed? There is a different, if admittedly similar, scene that plays out with Chet's fate being determined on your decision to leave earlier, thus helping the pair if we help the pair before trouble arises. Though you end up basically at the same place with not much being different. Chet is never seen again anyway, and apart from Herschel being more agreeable to the perimeter being secured, nothing else impacts on your later story. I would call this a fairly minimal on the grounds of things. You certainly aren't changing the world, and you end up being back to the usual plot beats no matter what. But this was just the first decision, and it's a minor one at that. There is certainly potential that decisions could drastically alter the way the game and the story plays out, such as a significant character dying. Yet it also warns us that this idea of superficial choices could be on the money. Let's look at some examples of what can change within the game, and then how this affects it. Let's discuss how well these are implemented, and what this means for our retrospective perspective of The Walking Dead Season 1. We met Carly and Doug in episode 1 and given a choice to save one or the other at the end of that episode. I originally saved Carly, the objectively better choice in my opinion. She is in the story until she dies halfway through episode 3. In this time she saves Lee several times with her shooting skills, even grazing Andy at the St. John's farm. Her investigative nature has her play with the camcorder and question Lee on his backstory, even giving us the option to tell others. Carly's death at the hands of Lily comes from Carly's defense of Ben and her willingness to cave in to her demands. All in all, it feels like this is quite a lot of things that could only have occurred due to us saving Carly. What then is different if we save Doug? There is the obvious background chatter and discussions that are replaced with us getting to know Doug and his opinions rather than Carly's. When Travis turns into a zombie, instead of Carly shooting him, Doug will try and hit him with a plank, only knocking the zombie and requiring more struggling on Lee's part. Instead of Carly noticing the Dairy Farm brothers, Doug's installation of an alarm system alerts us to them instead. When Doug is held hostage by Andy, he uses his laser pointer to blind Andrew, giving him time to get away. He's also the one to give the video camera back to Lee and dies by Lily defending Ben. What I have highlighted here is that there is a different flavour to what happens in the story depending on whether Carly or Doug are saved. Fundamentally though, they serve the same purpose. They do the same things, albeit in different ways. This feels like it undermines the significance of the choice, as the game doesn't feel it has adapted but just slightly altered in a more cosmetic way than to anything substantial. This is certainly true to a point, but there is less obvious differences that actually could be more substantial. Firstly, the game is very much about character, and while that character serves similar roles, they do so in very different attitudes and do act in very different independent ways of each other. If Doug was randomly shooting zombies to save Lee, it would feel less authentic than his workarounds and his ingenuity in helping the crews. Lee's blossoming romance is only explored with Carly, and you have very limited interaction about Lee's backstory if she's not around, meaning you do miss out on the potential of sharing your history if you save Doug. During the firefight at the motel, Carly is shooting at the bandits with Lee while Kenny is working on starting the RV. Doug, instead, is not such a good shot and helps Kenny. This actually has some effect on the gameplay, with more enemies being around but you escaping in a quicker time. This example and the struggle with the zombified Travis being more difficult with Doug give gameplay differences based on our choices, something that is harder to notice even when playing, but is actually much more significant. I believe that this is enough to feel that the game is adapting to the choices I've made, even if the same plot progresses and the same story beats mostly occur. But there are plenty of times when outcomes are less significant than they are portrayed. There are a lot of choices you are tasked with making that have no payoff, or at least they are so minor that they are basically irrelevant. Arguably, there are many dialogue choices that make no difference to the story. Some don't promise to be fair. The small talk in the back of the police car is an example of this. However, there are decisions that seem very important at the time, but turn out to be nothing. Defending Duck from Larry and his trigger-happy nature when we first reach the Everett pharmacy is a choice against righteous hope and brutal practicality, but no matter what your stance, Duck survives. The following episodes has us locked in cold storage with Larry and his heart giving out. We can choose to try and help him or splat his brains out with Kenny. Whether we decide to participate or not, Larry ends up dead. In these cases, our actions are still reacted to, even if it doesn't change much in the grand schemes, and it changes our standings with members of the group, but others seem even less important. The amount of medicine we recover when returning to the pharmacy never gets mentioned, as it's lost quite soon after. The food we hand out at the motel group, apart from a few hungry faces, doesn't get mentioned. If we use all our bullets needlessly shooting zombies in the final episode, we just get given another gun. You'd think that these resources in an apocalypse would be significant and would have real importance to how the game plays out and what happens to the characters, but it doesn't. One way these choices are justified, despite having little tangible effect, is that they change the way that characters interact with you, making your playthrough feel starkly different. And to be fair, having opinions change over time from interactions or lack thereof seems very natural. There are many situations people find themselves in where they'll be forced to engage with and even support people they do not get on with. Workplaces are an obvious example of this. For Lee and his changing group, this is no different. The survivors of The Walking Dead Season 1 can change their tone wildly with Lee based on how much we've talked with them and how much we've supported them in the past. This feeling and tone can make significant impact on how the playthrough feels. To me, that is changing the story. I consistently brought up the issue of Kenny's character being unrealistically antagonistic with us throughout because his tone didn't seem to match the key decisions we made, but he was by far the exception to the rule. However, there is a limit to what others will do for you if they don't like you, and this affection based on tone is reaffirmed at the end of episode 4 when Lee asks the surviving members to support him in his rescue for Clementine. This idea of this more subtle system coming to a head shows it is seen as important, and when you reach this conclusion and its subsequent ending slide, it feels significant. I think it was an important thing for the game to do, and it made the ongoing minor character interactions feel grander. But there are some major flaws in its execution. Any decision will have factors that are external to the character dynamics, but by having the choice also include the safety of Clementine makes it a bit weirder. Not only are you choosing to stay or leave Clee, but you're also choosing to help or abandon an 8-year-old girl, something that I think that none of them would do. This could be solved with them deciding to try and help find Clem without Lee, and it's weird that they don't include this in this decision. The other issue is that no matter what happens, you end up back with the whole group, with the remainder of them being reintroduced after the first couple of scenes. I understand certain decisions slowly leading back onto the same path, but this is supposed to be the culmination of your character's choices. It should have some sizable effect, especially if Lee is going to end up alone with Clem at the end anyway. It is easy to think then that these decisions are not impactful at all. The story mostly stays similar, and even the tone of characters means very little. Well, in some cases this is very true. Replaying The Walking Dead Season 1 can be very repetitive. The same beats play out, and for the most part we meet the same people. For a game that says it tailors to how you play, it feels very lacking in real decisional depth. However, I wouldn't say that this picking options is totally irrelevant though, and this is because the best choices that are given impact on the player and not necessarily on the game. Choosing whether or not to share the fact that you were bitten with your fellow survivors makes little consequence to the story, but the mood that choice sets is impactful for those who play, and despite little changing, it certainly feels different for the player that is engaged. The Walking Dead Season 1 is a story-driven experience, and these choices that do work so well do impact on the story, just not in its plot but in its telling. This may feel cheap for the extent the game goes into emphasising your agency, and many people will want more bold decisions, and I think that's a fair opinion to have, but I do think that there is dramatic differences in the way that the story is told when it is done right, even if it isn't what you're expecting. In episode 3, you have to get Kenny to stop the train and deal with the reality of his dying son. In the main playthrough, I talked him down. Here is another option.
You couldn't save Herschel's son then, and you can't save Duck now.
Shut your mouth!
So you're running like a coward.
Just leave me the fuck alone! I don't need you, and Duck doesn't need you! You don't even have a child! You don't know what this is like! You fucker! You're not helping my family! You're not helping Clementine! You're not helping anybody! I fucking hate you, Lee. Do you hear me? I don't know what to do.
Stop the train.
Okay.
Both of these scenes lead to the same thing, with little difference, but as a player I know that this would feel different, and for the most part that is enough in The Walking Dead Season 1. Kenny dealing with his family and their demise, growing your bond with Clementine, having to deal with the fallout of a lost loved one, and finally letting Clem decide to kill us or leave us to turn. These all feel strong enough on their influence on the player that they don't need to change much else.
I heard you outside my treehouse that day and thought about dropping a hammer on your head.
I asked whether or not The Walking Dead Season 1 and its success was just a case of being at the right place at the right time, and there is no denying that there is an element of things falling into place. The rise of the popularity of The Walking Dead, increasing mainstream acceptance of online-only content, and Telltale suiting their content perfectly. From the less time-intensive sketch design of the game's models to the way that The Walking Dead is a drama-driven property, all of this suited Telltale's strengths and limitations. But this isn't to say that they didn't take these bits of fortune in their stride. They did a great job of taking taking a known world with iconic characters and expanding that in a way that was neither alien nor overly familiar. The first episode did include a couple of recognisable faces, that of Glenn and Herschel. Neither overstayed their welcome and thus didn't overshadow the new recruits. In Herschel's case, meeting him and his son before Sean's untimely death gave us first-hand viewing of what is just mentioned later in the comics and in the TV show. I don't think that the narrative truly gets into its stride until later on, but the first couple of episodes do a good job of establishing the history, character and motivations of our main group, and while they're a bit slow, they aren't unbearably so, and they add to the dystopian feel of monotony and survival. Personally, I'm not the biggest fan of Lee's mysterious backstory, and his past and struggles with family don't hit as well as they could have if we knew more to begin with. I don't think they took away anything, just a bit of a missed opportunity and a case of some teething pains in the story. What wasn't just a flash in a pan problem was how The Walking Dead Season 1 approached mystery altogether. It often wanted to have its cake and eat it, with overly egregious hints being commonplace, making you well ahead of the characters in the game but with no sense of intended irony. And this over-eagerness to make sure the player didn't miss anything also bled the game of any difficulty in its puzzles. There was probably a worry that people unused to adventure games would probably get bored if stuck for too long, as they did with the overcomplicated and impossible solutions that were commonplace in the 90s. But on the whole, there were a lot of narrative clues naturally built into the puzzles, which showed that they were better integrated into the plot and also fairly easy anyway. So this was just all irrelevant, making the puzzles just far too easy for most players. And this hurt even more when there was no option to make this harder for yourself. In terms of other gameplay elements, there is an over-reliance on quick-time events, and this does hurt The Walking Dead, but they were often intersected with enough other elements that you had some variety. But by the end of the 5th episode, I was crying out for something different. But these elements did do enough, and only just, but they did do enough to keep your nerves up as you played through the game for what it was really there for. Its story. It's sublime in its telling, and the game emphasising the emotion through its gameplay. This sole focus on what does work does mean that there are some peaks and troughs in what we come across, with the Stranger's introduction being a bit of a low point in my opinion. But what they do get right, they get really right, and what they get really right is what really matters. Lee and Clementine. You buy into them, their partnerships, differences, and them being permanently separated, with Clementine having to go on in this hard world all on her own. Well, it's definitely enough to have you coming back for more. Many will rightfully deride the lack of agency you have as Lee, especially considering how much you were promised. And it's true that the choices you make in-game never let you deviate from the plot's destination. But the way you get there, the roads you choose to travel, they have so many bittersweet moments that even if your choices don't change the story, your choices will change you. And there's no doubt that when you're asked whether or not to kill Lee in that last choice, that you will remember this. Thank you for enjoying this long retrospective of The Walking Dead Season 1. It's taken me a very long time as I've had to battle with illness, and so you can probably tell there's differences in times when I recorded, and I apologise for that, but I hope that overwhelmingly it comes across how I wanted it. Yeah, and also please do comment below if your opinions both on the video and on the game as a whole. I'd love to know what your thoughts are and any games that you suggest going at as I try to do more as I'm getting better in the new year. Thank you very much and have a great time. Bye-bye.